Please stand. Recite the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May you remain standing and have a moment of silence, please, for 9/11. Thank you. Downtown Mahopac Properties, amended site plan. For anyone that's speaking tonight, there's 2 microphones, so just make sure you're speaking to one of them, please.
Good evening.
Hi, Joe. Mike?
This is on for resolution. All of my comments have been addressed, but I believe there was something new came in.
Pat?
You have resolutions of approval, Mr. Chairman. There is an amended bond number for this, and there is since our last meeting, conditions of approval that were provided to you from the DOT. Those have been incorporated into this resolution of approval.
Rich?
So the resolution is, as Pat mentioned, it has an updated bond amount, and it included the costs associated with meeting the DOT requirements. Other than that, all engineering comments have been addressed.
Mr. Chairman, if
Joe,
I
you
might
want
speak?
to Take us through the change, yes. please.
Yes. We did meet with the New York State DOT several weeks ago, and basically they came up with a whole series of comments. First of all, they decided that they would not allow us to tie into their catch basin because they wouldn't allow our pipe to go into their catch basin.
Joel, is that microphone on? Please?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Anyway, so, and the open pipe that open trench that they wanted would have to go into the sidewalk. Then they wanted us to do a complete drainage study from that catch basin up Route 6, down Route 6, all the way to the lake. It just got totally out of hand. And then they said, well, you have a sidewalk, but we want you to replace the sidewalk with a 5-foot sidewalk and a big 10-foot wide area in the middle of the sidewalk for turning around for the ADA. It just got to the point where the study alone would have cost thousands and thousands of dollars, which obviously my client hasn't got the means to even do that. So we met with the town engineer, and we came up with a solution whereby we kept all of our drainage on the site, so what are called infiltrators. So no water would be going onto the Route 6, except the little water in the front there, which has been going out there for all these years. So we sent Rich the calculations. We sent them to the DOT. If you have the last memo dated September 6th, you'll see that they are reviewing the proposed drainage, although it's really, I think, the town engineer that has the final say, and he seems to feel that this is adequate. I did get a copy of the bond, and there's approximately, under New York State modifications, close to $30,000 worth of work that the state wants. It's my belief that the final say on something like this is up to you. If you read the memo that was sent by Mr. Gregory, there's information on here that is totally inaccurate. It says here, whenever a change or expansion of a business or other land use is expected to increase traffic flow on the state highway system through an existing driveway, it may be necessary for the owner to mitigate the impact of the increased traffic. Now, as you can see from the renderings that we have here and the discussions we've had over the last several months, the purpose of this building is not, there are no employees, there is no increase in traffic, the cars will be put in there, and that's about the end of it. Mr. Nicholas may go there once a week just to make sure everything is okay, but there is no increase of traffic. That is totally false, and therefore, based on that, on the DOT's expectation that increased traffic requires, therefore, all these changes, I would question the fact that there is no increase in traffic. Therefore, there are no changes to the use of the site, for the amount of traffic going in and out of the site. And if some of you have been around for many years, you remember there was a moving van company that was in there years and years ago, which used to have huge, 10 wheels, or excuse me, the 18 wheelers going in and out of that property, which of course no longer happens. So if anything, the amount of traffic has decreased. So I would question the comments from the DOT. We have not increased the traffic, therefore there's no need, as far as I'm concerned, and my client is concerned, to add this $30,000 worth of work. I think the board, over the months, has complimented us on the design of the building. There certainly will be an improvement. There's also a fair amount of landscaping that's going to go not only on this part where the new addition is going to, or the new building is going to go, but also it's carrying down around the existing buildings also. So it's a tremendous improvement to the site, and to add $30,000 of work that is absolutely unnecessary based on what the DOT says, increased traffic is expected, that is not true. So therefore, we would ask that the resolution be approved minus $30,000.
Comments from the board?
I guess the question needs to go back to Pat. Can we pass a resolution? I mean, considering what the DOT had said.
Right, you have no authority to modify or waive the DOT's requirements.
Right.
So it's either the applicant's obligation to go back and have this conversation with the DOT. It's not your call, it's the DOT's call.
Well,
I
but
actually
based
have
on the
this-
fact that there's information here that's incorrect.
I actually had the same comments. Yeah, I think the burden's on you, Joel, to go back to the DOT and then come back to us. I don't think the burden's on us to do that. Pat?
Correct, right. Your typical, with any other involved regulatory agency, you accept their comments and you impose those as conditions of your approvals.
So whatever they ask, technically, you can't override that?
I think you
We
go
certainly
back.
can't override the DOT.
I'm just asking.
Yeah.
Well, based on the fact that there's information here that's not correct.
So it may be incorrect, but it's the DOT's, you'd have to let the DOT know that.
Well, then,
It's your obligation to
Exactly.
convince them that they have to revise their statement.
well, then I ask that,
We can't just say, agree with you that it's not.
and I ask that we hold this over until we can
Sure.
resolve this.
Yeah, we can hold it over. You can review it with the DOT and come back at a later date when you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much.
Longview School, 110 Scout Hill Road, site plan.
Correct. All right. Yeah, before we start, as a result of a potential conflict of interest that first arose last week, I am recusing myself from further discussion or deliberations by the board on the Longview School application.
Mike?
Yeah, they propose to convert the existing one-family dwelling into a private school. They are applying to the zoning board of appeals for an interpretation and in lieu, a variance for the parking. They disagree with my calculation. Until that's clarified, we don't know which number needs to go on the map for the parking, so that's where we are right now.
Pat?
And, Mr. Chairman, you should address the parking issue because it's not as though there is insufficient space on the site to provide the parking. The applicant has proposed to improve a certain number of those spaces and then leave the balance as pervious spaces. But nevertheless, there is available area to provide for all of the required parking on the site. The applicant is also proposing, as I think they explained to you at the last meeting, to not construct the gym building that's shown on the plan. They're proposing to build that at a future stage. They would improve the foundation and use that as a recreational space until such time in the future where they propose to build the gym. Your board's policy with respect to phasing approvals would not allow that, so it's really up to the applicant to develop a procedure that would allow them to do that sometime in the future if they don't propose to do it at the moment, currently. There is a new landscaping plan that's provided. Most of that's interior to the site. It really doesn't serve screening or buffering for a neighbor. It's really internal ornamental landscaping, but it's a fairly thorough landscaping plan. And there was some reference in the application materials about a clarification of the monument sign, and there was reference to a drawing, and we didn't have that drawing in the package. So if you could provide that, Peter, of the monument sign, we need to see that.
Thank you. Rich?
So as everyone has already discussed what the project's about, the following referrals are warranted. Mahopac Falls Fire Department, the applicant has acknowledged that and has submitted the letter and drawing to the Mahopac Falls Volunteer Fire Department. They acknowledge the fact that they need a stormwater permit under the New York State General Permit. There's still a question of the area of disturbance for the work. The full environmental assessment form has it as 0.8 acres when the SWIP has it listed as 1. So that just needs to be brought into conformance with each other. A SWIP has been provided with details. Again, if things are going to change with regards to parking, that's why it's still under review right now. The SWIP does need to be updated to account for the change in area of disturbance, and the notice of intent must be signed and sealed. The applicant has acknowledged the need for a stormwater maintenance agreement per section 15685 of the town code, and the need for a performance bond. I recommend, just for ease of review, the applicant should provide a single set of completed documents for the file. Right now, when he's only updating one set of files, and then he's referring to other drawings, I have to go back and find the drawings. Sometimes we just toss them because we don't need them anymore. I had spoken to the applicant's representative about that, and they will provide them in the future. The full environmental assessment form must be updated to account proposed conditions. Stormwater management document identifies drawings SY6A and SY6B. Only SY6A has been provided, so I'm just wondering where that other document is. Or update the SWIP. Retaining walls greater than 6 foot must be certified by a New York State licensed structural engineer. Applicants noted that comment. And access around the rear of the buildings must be considered, and the applicant's working with the Mahopac Falls Fire Department.
Thank you.
So why we're here today is we're hoping to get a referral to the ZBA. Again, we have a mixed-use educational facility where we both have K to middle school and high school students. The zoning regulations are different for high schools versus that of middle school and K to middle school students. And our overall plan, we did look at various options on how to create more parking, but I think it's apropos for us because it impacts on drainage and overall disturbance is to get the ZBA to give us an interpretation on how to apply the zoning regs to a mixed-use facility that we have. Mr. Schilling has written an opinion. We have also written one as well, and we think it deserves merit of review by the ZBA to sort of work this interpretation out. As Pat indicated, we do have land to add additional parking spaces, but again, we're in a catch-22 situation. We have area allocated, but we don't want to develop it. And if we don't have to develop it, we don't have to build a bigger detention structure, and it goes round and round. So that's why we want to go to ZBA if we may, just to get them to interpret that, and if necessary, grant us a variance to that.
I have a question while you're on that topic.
Yes.
So in the letter from you, you indicate that the school consists of approximately 70% elementary and middle school and 30% high school. And that would be currently.
Yes.
Presumably, these children are going to stay with you as they progress through the grades. So at one point, you may have it completely reversed. You may have 70% high school and 30% elementary.
That's a good point. That's one aspect of it. Historically, though, they're running at much lower levels of high school students versus K to middle school. We're anticipating about 15 high school students of a maximum, which is about 30%. And we based our analysis on that 15 out of 50 would be our distribution. And the way we look at it is, if we had 15 students driving, that'd be 15 spaces. And if we have 8 teachers and 6 associates, That's 14 more spaces. The total would be 29. We're providing 38 spaces. So we're providing much more spaces than required. But the problem we have is if you take 50 students, all supposedly driving, that's how that's the interpretation we have.
I get it, but part of our responsibility is to anticipate things that will happen and to
Right.
plan accordingly. We're a planning board, and we're trying to plan accordingly.
Yes.
And that's what the
only
code
point I wanna
says.
make.
That's what the code
Well, yeah,
says, too.
besides the fact that that's what the code says.
Yes.
You know.
Right. So our premise would be to go to the zoning and get their at least interpretation of this potential use. Mr. Schilling indicated that the initial zoning for high school was based upon high school and older, where all the people would be driving. But again, we're looking at low percentage of drivers in our facility. We have a lot of conservatism. We can't provide a green space for overflow. It would be green. It'd be a turf basis below it, and that's one thing we're proposing is go with turf parking to give us extra capacity. But again, a full build out is we're trying not to do a full build out of all the parking spaces, and overflow would be on grass.
I hear you.
So we're kind of, I think the ZBA could answer a lot of questions, and if we had a clear direction of what would be acceptable, we could then move this thing forward and get it finished. But, and we've done studies showing 55 parking spots. We've done studies with 40 spaces of parking, and there's a big difference in impacts. So for the sake of the applicant, we're hoping ZBA will grant us that relief to 38 to 40 spaces, and we'd have 10 spaces, which would be overflow in the future on grass. But again, the ordinance doesn't speak to that right now. It's either parking or full parking isn't really allocated per the zoning, and that's why we need the interpretation.
I want to go back to I was out there last week looking at the property. Why there?
It has a couple, it was picked for a couple reasons. Somewhat isolated, large
very.
parcel of land. It basically, it's at it's a geological location where it's on a hillside, so there's not really any adjacent neighbors. If you look down the hill from the property, there's power lines. So literally, it's about the best location we could find with the acreage where you don't really impact the neighbors that much. Our problem is, if you want to put this in any other residential area, say on flat land or in the middle of a big subdivision of existing homes, there could be a lot of noise impacts, et cetera. But because of the way the site is, we're set much lower than everyone, and we're on a plateau between power lines and a mountainside where the neighbors are all isolated by the terrain. The tree buffers around it would remain, and we're working with the existing structure.
Now, the fire department has not looked at this yet, correct?
Well, actually, we've met with them, and we're
feedback?
giving them a water tank was their request. We are putting an underground water tank for storage of water for them. That was requested.
Okay.
And I've been pleading for a letter for quite a while, but again, I think they want to see how we move along, and then they would grant me a permit once we, I guess, achieved a farther goal on the project itself. But their only request to us was an underground storage tank. And we also have a big K-turn at the end of our property, which meets the requirements of fire truck access once a fire is fought. So we made amendments to them already.
Have you received a copy of the letter from the neighbor? I'm going to get the name wrong, 12 Hillside View Road, Peter Neshway?
I have not.
We'll make sure it gets the letter. It relates to the road, the traffic potential and so forth, and notes that that road, that end section, I guess, of the road is not maintained by the town. So do we know if that's the case or not?
I do not know. You talk about the spur, the last couple of feet? I don't know the answer
Into
to
the
that.
driveway? Yeah. it's-
Have you had opportunity to see this?
I've seen the letter, so I don't know what they're referring to. If it's that spur into the driveway, I'm not sure that that's within the right-of-way. That might be on that private property. I think that's what they're referring to.
The applicant owns the end of the road, end of the roadway is on his property, and there is a spur or a split right before the property itself. And so they own the entrance to the land itself is on the driveway is owned by the applicant, and we're also taking down one of the walls to create better access into the property as part of this proposal.
We'll see that, Rose, you get a copy of this letter so that you
Sure.
can address it.
Yeah, we'll address that, yes.
I have another question. Do we have documented what the maximum enrollment would be there?
Yes, 50 students, and we can give you a written document from the owners to that effect.
Yeah,
They've testified to that already before you, prior to this, but we can give you it in writing.
Thank you.
Can I just ask you again, how many spaces can you provide? in your plan?
We're providing 38. We could provide 40 if we could provide 40 if we had to, paved,
And our engineer was asking for,
55,
Per our town code is 55.
yes.
Per the town code, they would need 55 spaces.
According to my calculation, I believe that's what it's.
25 plus the 5.
Yeah.
So we're looking at 15 spaces, a lot of spaces.
And you want to address that through overflow parking on the lawn because you don't want to create hardscape because you have a stormwater issue. Is that true?
Yes, a couple reasons why is it's as you go down toward the end of the property, it's steep, and for us to make additional parking spaces, we have to blast and create more pad areas, which would constitute quite a hardship.
any other comments?
Yeah, just a point of clarification. So the parking spaces, you had indicated 38, right? Yes. Okay. Are all 38 on hard surface, or are any of those 38 on turf surface?
Please use the microphone.
We initially started with 11 on turf, but we analyzed them as gravel. So basically, they could be we designed stormwater management if they were on hardscape, but currently they're shown as gravel. And currently before you, you have 38 spaces, but we did do a plan where you could take the parking spaces and extend them along where our hammerhead turning area is for the fire trucks, and continue the parking along in the easterly direction to make additional spaces. So we can do a couple things. We can make it gravel and hardscape. We can go turf if it's allowed, and hardscape, and we can do combinations of those to finish the project off.
How many are on hardscape, up to 38 to 40?
Currently on the plan, we have 27 on hard.
What is hardscape? Can you explain that?
Pavement. 27 are on pavement,
And how many are on,
11 on gravel.
okay, so the gravel you'll need a variance for too, because that's not permanently improved.
That's correct. That's why we have to talk about that, yes. And they could be paved. It doesn't impact our stormwater management minimally.
Would you point out where the gravel would be and the paved spaces would be?
Right, so basically, if I may.
Can you use the microphone? Sorry.
Take it
The other one comes off.
Just take it out of the.
So what we have on the site plan is where the existing house is. To the east, the house and the gym. We have parking spaces all through this area which are on pavement, hardscape. Prior to those, above the septic area, they're on gravel or turf. The turf basically is a special reinforced material which shows grass. And for aesthetic purposes, we were trying to put the grass in the front. We have an additional area toward the rear where we can add 14 more spaces, but they would have to be to the east of our current 9 spaces, and they would extending down in this direction here. So we can add more here as well if we had to. So we have, and they would be on turf or gravel as well. And so our intent would be to land bank them and then basically finish them as required. And by finishing as required, they'd be turf grass, which is gravel and grass growing through it, and worst case, we have to pave them. And that would be the approach to the project itself.
Is that a stormwater pond there on the over?
Yes, it's a bioretention structure which has its detention capabilities. So the intent is because we're at they have an existing facility now, and they have like 32 children there and 5 high school students. That's kind of that's what they have now. So the intent of the growth of our school would be in high school children in terms of the model we presented to you. That is the 15 high school kids. When we grow their current facility at this location, it's mainly high school kids we're adding to the count. And so what we're hoping to do is create the hardscape and allow land banking in other locations in case demand is required. And that we're trying to work that out either with the ZBA as an interpretation, because right now, even the math we have showing 15 high school kids and our teachers, we still have a lot of extra parking. Because what's happening is we have a bus service providing most of our service of the children is by buses. So bus service is bringing the K and middle school children to the site. And so it's mainly buses who don't stay there. The buses drop the children off, do a K-turn, and leave. So literally, it's an empty parking space. When we need parking is when an assembly or some sort of event takes place. And that's where the turf areas would come into play, because they're not being used all the time. The car would just sit there on the grass for that activity. And that's why we're kind of we're in a gray area, because again, the ordinance says paved parking is required of X amount. So we're hoping to work out something with zoning where we could go with the grass. And we can show 55 spaces, but we're in that gray area. We'd rather not put them in initially, but we can definitely create some vehicle where we could add them as necessary.
Mike, I just want to, so as the way our code reads, the 55 spaces would have to be on blacktop.
That's correct.
Not a combination of blacktop and gravel and blacktop.
The way it reads is permanently improved, which is blacktop, or also the semi-pervious pavers. That's another way they allow it.
Like the library had
The
done?
board interpreted that was permanent improvement.
Would you consider that?
Well, I'll be honest with you, by the time you put in those pavers, you might as well pave it. The costs are prohibitive with the pavers. Because we've had great success using it's called Easy Roll grass, turf grass parking, and it's in all the manuals. It's accepted by DEP. It's an approved alternative to a hardscape, and that's what we're trying to propose if we could with ZBA.
I think we'd like to see that before it goes to the ZBA.
I have four points that I think need to be addressed. I'd like to see another Turner crank, as Anthony just said, with the parking. I'd like to get feedback from the fire department also on this, because it is such a bad area. I think you ought to address the letter that will make sure Rose gets you.
Yes.
And then Rich has, must be a page and a half to 2 pages of comments here. I think you ought to meet with Rich and try to, my recommendation would be to hold
I
over.
think that will work today.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so. I agree.
A question I have to Rich is, do we design it now with all pavement at this point in time, or do half and half, or gravel, or? I'm kind of caught between where I'm going with the drainage.
That's a decision you're gonna have to make. More conservative would probably be the better way to go.
Okay.
You can always pull that back.
Okay.
Let me ask you, follow up with Rich, and we're not trying to slow this down. Hopefully
Yeah,
we get back
right.
on the agenda in 2 weeks. And
Okay.
there just seem to be too many comments, and we need
Okay.
a little more dialogue on it.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, Peter.
The
Okay,
one
thank you
thing
very
they
much.
can do is they can go for their interpretation of the code. If they would like, that's okay, because then they got that out of the way at least, at the zoning board. They don't need a referral for that.
Right,
That's just interpreting the code for the way it's written.
right.
Yeah, if they can do that, Mike, that's terrific.
Yeah,
That'd be
that's-
great for us. That'd be
That's the
good
one
for
thing
us,
they
yeah.
can do without referral.
We don't want to slow you down. We just
I
wanna
appreciate
make
that, yes, thank
And
you.
that'll tell you which direction to go with your design.
That's where we're at, yes, exactly, correct.
sure. Good
Okay,
idea, Mike, thanks.
very good, thank you very much.
Braemar at Carmel, site plan. Good evening, Jeff. Mike?
Yeah, the applicant proposes a 152-bed assisted living facility on the grounds of the former Guidepost property. This is in the location where the office building was approved. Lot depth and lot width lines are now provided. Signage complies with zoning. All my zoning comments have been addressed.
Thank you. Pat?
We had asked the applicant, Mr. Chairman, to clarify how that facility was going to be used. They provided you with a narrative clarifying that, number of employees, hours of operation, and so forth. So that's been provided to you. The applicant has also clarified the facility is 152 beds, not 200 beds. So that's been clarified. There was confusion about the driveway access. This is a separate driveway, separate from the distillery driveway, so a separate driveway. There was a traffic assessment report that was provided, and we asked them to include the distillery with this facility and to compare that to the prior Guidepost Paladin traffic study. The numbers are in fact lower than the prior application during the AM peak hour. It's 36 trips fewer and 20 trips fewer during the PM peak hour. So they're below that prior threshold that was part of your previous approval. There is a drop-off in front of the building under sort of a porte-cochere. It's shown as 24 feet wide, and if you see on the plan, there's sort of a tight radius around there. We have suggested that that should be widened a bit in case someone is parked sort of awkwardly, or there's a UPS truck there or whatever, to widen it a bit. I think they have the room to do that. The applicants indicated they thought it was sufficient. It's our opinion it should be widened. They have provided a loading area in the rear of the building. They've indicated that that's sufficient for their particular facility. Rich will address they need to update their sewer and water capacities to demonstrate we have enough to deal with that. They've provided you a photometric plan that demonstrates that they're complying with our lighting standards, particularly along the property lines. They've got grading details that Rich can talk about as well. And they have indicated that there's a revised landscaping plan. The buffer around the property is remaining intact. They're not disturbing that existing wooded buffer.
Thank you. Rich?
So this is for the Braemar facility. It's currently served by Water District 2 and Sewer 2. Applicant has submitted a water and wastewater report. Use. So this is served by Water District and Sewer District 2. Applicant has submitted a water and wastewater use report. It's currently under review. An applicant has noted that comment, and we'll be working with them as we move forward. They know that the referrals are needed for the fire department in Carmel and the town of Carmel Highway Department. Regulatory permits are needed, include the New York State DEC for stormwater, New York City DEP for stormwater, town of Carmel water and sewer connections, and the town of Carmel highway permit. Applicant will be required to supply a stormwater maintenance agreement under section 156 of the code. Applicant has also noted the need for coverage under stormwater regs. The project does disturb over an acre. And they are going to develop a SWIP. It has not, have you provided it yet? I think you've provided it, so it's been under review. And a performance bond and associated engineering fee must be established for the work. Some minor detailed comments, the applicant should meet to discuss a water system shutdown and need for a water system work plan as they go forward. That would be after they're ready to build. Available site distances have been provided, but I'd ask that they provide the backup calculations for them. All sewers must meet Town of Cornwall Town Code, Section 120. Notes should be added to the drawings. Same for sidewalks, manholes, and guide rails per Section 128 of the Town Code. There is a little discrepancy on the drawings that needs to be looked at. We recommended all service connections be K-copper. They provided a response letter that said it would be ductile iron. However, the drawings call out PVC, so that information should just be clarified and fixed.
Thank you. Jeff?
Good evening. Jeff Quintelmo from Insight Engineering, Surveying, and Landscape Architecture. I'm here this evening with Jessica Coltalise from Philbin Group. Richard Fulaski could not be here this evening and apologizes. Also with us is Mark McKee, who's the project architect from H2M Engineers and Architects. As your consultants noted, we have responded to a number of comments, both from the board and from the consultants. We've also, for the board's knowledge, received comments from your architectural consultant. Our architect is working on the responses to them. They will be meeting with him, discuss some of the details. So our goal is to be able to come back with slightly modified architectural elevations as well as material boards for the board. At this point, what we'd like to request from the board is scheduling of the public hearing. We are required to have a public hearing, and we would like to make that next step if the board feels it's appropriate.
Comments from the board?
I just have a comment for, a question for Rich. In your memo, you talk about, you know, the water district number 2, and you say, you know, the application it's currently under review. When do you think you're going to finish evaluating the impact?
I'm going to have to meet with Jeff and talk to him about any additions that we were talking about earlier, and then it'll be done before the next meeting.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, my only concern is considering a distillery and, you know, the impact the distillery will have on water district. I was just thinking that this is something we should really get a clear answer on before we move forward.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
So I have a concern, Jeff, with if we go to schedule a public hearing now, the comments from our architect, those issues haven't been addressed yet. I think they would be needed for the public.
Okay. Would it be possible for us to schedule a hearing and submit revised plans addressing what we can of those comments? Certain of the comments suggested, for instance, a more New England style. That's somewhat subjective. And you know, they were going to meet and talk about it. I think the massing of the building, the general elevations, are not going to change drastically, but I do believe that between now and the next meeting, we can take another crack at it.
I feel the same way with Rich's comments. Rich had quite a few comments. Do you feel that?
Utility capacities, which
Yeah.
may in fact alter the building somewhat. It could conceivably do that. So typically, you move to public hearing when the plan is fixed. There may be a change. He's close, but I think he's probably one round of comments away.
That's why I'm looking at all this, you know. I want to discuss with the board. I want to get some feedback from the board here too, though. Kim, I know you're always involved with the architectural part of, did you get a chance to look at the,
I did, I looked at it. I actually don't have the, any drawings in front of me. But I still feel that there's some things that still need to be done
Yeah.
on it. It's not completely what we usually look for.
and our architect was asking for rendered elevation, you know, materials, samples. So I think it's, my own opinion, I think it is a meeting too short or so, I don't know.
Well, usually we ask
Yeah.
for samples to be brought in, colors. So I think that's what we're looking for
Okay,
first.
so what we can do then is we'll correspond with your consultant architect, see what we can straighten out in some simpler discussions. We'll update the architecture plans, we'll bring material sample boards to the next meeting, if it's okay with the board.
Do you have the letter from our
We do,
architect? You
yes.
Okay.
So do you have a meeting in 2 weeks?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Could we then be held over for the 2 weeks and bring the sample boards and the
I'm
revisions
fine.
to the architecture?
Personally, I'm fine with that, yeah.
Okay.
Believe me, we don't want to carry over all these.
No, no problem. No problem.
But,
We share that pain.
yeah.
So, yeah, no problem. We'll come back next time with that, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail, and hopefully at that point, we can schedule a public hearing. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yankee Land Development, extension of preliminary subdivision approval.
Hello,
Good evening.
good evening.
Mike?
I have no objection to the extension. The only thing is, as we always ask, why? Why are we still dragging this out? But I guess that's usually the board that asks.
Pat?
No objection, Mr. Chairman. However, this is an extension of the preliminary approval. There's no limits on preliminary extensions, so this can go on infinitely. So as Mike said, we need to have a reason why.
Rich?
Engineering Department does not have an objection to granting the extension. Same comments from the past couple of meetings regarding the site itself. There was a memo from 2012 from the Town of Carmel engineer, including a whole bunch of different comments, and they will all need to be addressed moving forward if the applicant wants to continue with the project.
So this started in 2012, right? So I assume.
Yeah, approval in 2012. It started prior to that.
Prior to that, so I assume a lot of our codes could have changed, and a lot of this might not be relevant. I mean,
At some point in time, that will absolutely be the case. Whether that's the case now, there haven't been too many changes, so, including the stormwater management regs, I think they were under the current regs at the time. But at some point in time, that's the point. The rules will have moved past that prior approval.
so I guess one question is, why and when?
Well, why is the market, first of all, and I have it on the market right now to sell. And hopefully it does sell and we can move forward from there. And another thing is I do want to come before you at some point, and I don't want to lose what I have already invested in the property, and I would like to hear from you guys at some point, is we have two cul-de-sacs coming into this 14-lot subdivisions off of two roads. Is it possible to subdivide this into two separate parcels where it would be easier to sell this property into two 7-lot subdivisions instead of one 14-lot subdivision, since there's going to be two separate roads? And that is the question that I would like to have answered also, if that is a possibility.
Now you can get into our new codes. We can talk about.
The only way I would know to do that would be to do a two-lot subdivision.
Correct.
So you chop the big lot in two, and then divide each lot at separate times under separate name, and get approval on each one separately.
But without losing what we've done so far.
Now, you would, by virtue of doing that, you would lose what you have, so that's the sacrifice.
Now, why is that if we just did a straight line? Because we have.
Because you're not subdividing the 14 lots, you're abandoning the 14 lots, creating 2 lots, and then recreating 7 and 7. There's no other mechanism to do that, so unless you know of one, but that's really the only way you'd have to do that.
Because the 7 and 7 would still be there, all you're doing is creating a
So you'd have to
line.
come back to that, but in order to get there, you'd have to create 2 lots, not 14 lots split in half.
Right, but you still have two roads, it's two
It would be
separate.
conceivably the same
Semantics.
exact plan. It's a bit like semantics, but there's no way to get to 7 and 7 without going back to 2,
And there's no way to do that.
unless you, I'm
There's no
open
way
to
for
a
you
good idea.
guys. I'm asking.
It'd have to be a new application.
I'm
It would be-
asking.
Yeah, I'd,
3 applications.
There would be a question then, with each individual lot, whether,
If the individual lots do not change, and
no, I
every,
mean, if you subdivide, if you withdraw this application, subdivide to 2, then that needs to be relooked at under the code, and 7 lots, and
Right.
area, and, you know, all of the
Right.
same code requirements have to be re-reviewed for those applications.
it would be, but assuming nothing's changed, it would be difficult for you to deny that. You've already
and-
approved it.
Well, unless
Something's
open
changed.
space requirement or something
Correct.
per
Right.
lot or
Right.
changed, depending on how.
They're way over the 3-acre thresholds.
Okay.
They're, everything's much larger, but would it work? You'd have to show us that on paper.
Right.
but if it did work, would
have
it be
to do-
possible without losing what we've done?
3 subdivisions. It would be 3 subdivisions, a 2-lot, a 7-lot, and a 7-lot.
Yes, but would we lose everything that we've done to date?
You couldn't preserve a preliminary approval on the 14-lot subdivision and then simultaneously file a 2-lot subdivision to do 7 and 7 lots. It's either one or the other.
No, I get that, but I'm just saying, but if we did a lot line and everything worked, would we have to start from the beginning? That's my question.
Yeah, unless you think it can figure another way. I think you have to go back to create 2 at the beginning and then recreate 7 and 7.
But then we would have to do all the testing and going back and starting this whole process that we
So you-
did
I mean-
for 12 years?
The same testing presumably would apply. The geological conditions haven't changed, groundwater conditions haven't changed, so presumably most of that remains valid.
That's a health department question.
Yeah, and I think it's, what you're getting at, what I'm trying to point out is, unless you need to vet whether those lots, if subdivided under our current code, would the current design layout, which is what you're trying to preserve, albeit under 2 lots, if it's divided in 2 lots, would those 7 on each lot still meet all the code requirements that exist? The general feeling is they probably would, but that's not for us to determine, that's for you to determine.
Yeah, what I would
And
recommend-
risk, if your assessment is that that should be doable.
Right, what I'd recommend is you come on and sit down with us. We could go over that to make sure you don't lose anything by shifting your approach to marketing the property. So we can help you,
That's-
we can help you sort that out.
That would be great. And who should I contact?
Rose.
Contact Rose. Contact Rose.
Okay,
She'll set it up.
thank you very much. Any other questions?
I'm okay with, yes, the board, but, granting a 100-day extension, I think it benefits you to work with the town, because otherwise I think we're gonna be here next year, 6 months, so,
When
and
is
then
the-
sooner or later, we're gonna reject it, right? So make you go back, so I think it's behooves you to work with, we'll extend the 180
Right.
days, but you should.
Because we haven't had any luck trying to sell it the way it is.
What's the
So
current
we're trying to.
expiration on that?
There isn't.
What is the permit through right now?
Forever.
For,
180 days is the extension.
Right, but preliminary approval, there's no termination of preliminary approval, as opposed to a final approval?
Correct.
It lasts forever. Our
Final
code-
approval also.
Yeah, our code is unique with regard to preliminary approval. There's no expiration.
So why does he need the extension?
There's no limit to extensions, I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's limited to,
When
right.
Okay, so currently, if we don't extend it, when does it expire?
As soon as you choose not to extend it, then it would expire.
Well,
But he
right
can
now,
ask
it
for an
expires on
infinite.
the 14th or something
Right,
like that,
but he can ask for 100, he
That's
can
what I'm
continue
saying,
asking
yeah.
for extensions forever.
Okay, but to the 14th, so we need to give at least some kind of extension to work with you on.
Right, right, right.
It's a 6-month extension,
Okay.
we need a motion.
Right.
Didn't the current, the last extension, I have here noted, it expired August 15th?
So we do retroactive to the
Retroactive, yeah.
expiration date because this is the next meeting. Right.
So we have a motion to extend for 180 days?
I'll make a motion to extend the preliminary subdivision approval for an additional 180-day period for
Second.
Yankee Land Development, tax map 76.15-1-12.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Work with the consultants.
I'll give a call.
Thank you. Tim Call, 232 South Lake, bond return.
How are you?
Good. Mike?
I have no comments on the bond return, no objection to it.
No objection to bond return, Mr. Chairman.
Rich?
So in response to a request by the applicant, the engineering department, performed a field inspection at the reference site, 225 East Lake, on August 29th, 2019, to evaluate the status of the site construction. The results of the investigation show that the site improvements were, as required by the planning board, have been completed, and we recommend that the bond that was posted on April 10th, 2019, in the amount of $6,900 be released.
We should schedule a public hearing?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to schedule a public hearing.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
That's it?
That's it.
Well, that's not it. So you're gonna have a public hearing, and then after the public hearing, that gets referred back to the town board, and then the town board approves to release it. So you have a couple of steps yet before you get it, but it's in process now.
That's it for tonight. Union Valley Cemetery, regrading application.
That was it, that was it. Did you wait, did we wait?
Mike?
The applicant proposes to regrade a large bowl-shaped property to make the property more usable for the cemetery. The project should be referred to ECB for comments. I don't know if there's wetlands in the area, but just in case, there's always a good thing.
Pat?
We have no concerns about this, Mr. Chairman. It's adjacent to the existing cemetery, and it's, again, as long as the ECB is okay with what they're doing, there's no planning issues associated with this.
Rich?
So this is a regrading application, as everyone, this involves regrading the northern portion of the Union Valley Cemetery, as well as the removal of trees and vegetation at 730 Union Valley Road. The disturbance is about 0.7 acres, which is above the threshold criteria for New York State DEC stormwater regs. The development of a stormwater pollution prevention plan is required. However, it must only have erosion and sediment controls are required for the site. Just some minor comments based on our code. All fill brought to the site, if there is any fill being brought to the site, must be certified per New York State DEC regulations. The location of access for how the fill will be delivered must be provided. That's if fill is being brought in. Plan information pursuant to 15643, landfills, grading, and excavations is lacking. Assessment of runoff from the site so as not to cause erosion, landslides, or increased runoff. Estimated quantity of excavated or removed soil for regrading or filling. Location of that portion, anything within 300 feet of wells or sewage disposal systems or natural water courses should just be shown on the map. Most of that is on there, but some of it needs to be just placed on there. Existing and final contours showing how the final slope's no steeper than 1 foot vertically for each 2 feet horizontally, and details of any drainage system proposed to be installed and maintained by the applicant if they are being there. So they're minor comments that can be relatively addressed, quickly addressed by the applicant.
Good evening. Jeff Quintelmo from Insight Engineering, Surveying and Landscape Architecture. I'm here this evening with Wendy Erickson, representing Union Valley Cemetery. As your consultants pointed out, this is kind of a bowl-shaped portion of the church and cemetery property on the north end of their property, which has just been laid fallow for many, many years. And the idea is to grade it off to reflect the contours of the improved part of the cemetery and prepare it for the potential for future grave sites, not in the foreseeable future, but in the very distant future. And as your code permits, we're here just for a land grading permit or regrading permit. We have provided a full erosion control plan which meets all the requirements of the SWIP, which Rich recommends. That plan is in fact the SWIP. We certainly would request a referral to the ECB if that is necessary. And I'm not sure if your grading permit procedure requires a public hearing or not, but if it does.
It doesn't, it's an option for the planning board. Sometimes they'll do it if they believe it's necessary. It's not a requirement.
So if it's not required, we'd like to not have it.
Comments from the board?
So I know this property is right off of Sandy, and this is right behind the stone wall of where the edge of the cemetery ends.
Correct. Yeah, as a matter of fact,
Take the microphone.
so what you see to the north of the wall is the unimproved side, which again is characterized right now by mostly low brush cover, and then as you go up the hill, there is some smaller second-growth trees.
I think it gets very marshy back there.
Excuse me?
Is it very marshy back there?
No, not at all. No, there's no wetlands or soft soils or anything that we came across in reviewing the site.
Is there any tree removal gonna be needed?
There will be tree removal. The eastern side of this fill, like I said, is a very low brushy vegetation, whereas as you start to climb the hill toward the back, there are some trees in there, but nothing significant in my opinion. And again, the idea is to reflect the contours of what's to the south and improved on the cemetery property.
Would that regrading have any visual impact on the neighbors,
Uh,
or the tree removal?
Yeah, not in my opinion. I don't know if Wendy, there's really not anything in eye shot from us.
Look really nice, it'll look much better. Right now, it doesn't look good.
You have to use the
You're
microphone.
gonna have to we're on TV, you need to use a microphone. Introduce yourself, please.
I'm Wendy Erickson, president of the Union Valley Cemetery. Actually, right now, it looks not great. And honestly, we need more burial sites eventually down the road. It's going to take a while. But once you remove some of this brush and vegetation, you get rid of the junk along the side of the walls, and you have some fill in there, the clean fill that you want, and we'd be able to move the stone wall over. It's going to make the cemetery and even Sandy Street look much nicer than it does now. I've lived there all my life.
So Wendy, wasn't this, and Jeff, wasn't this the area where people were starting to dump in there at one point
They
in
were
time?
actually,
So-
they've been dumping there since I've been 7 years old. They've been dumping things in there. That's basically what they've done. And then recently, of course, you know, they've been dumping more stuff in there. So you had to put a rope up there and put a sign, don't dump in there anymore. So I think by cleaning it up, putting the fill in there, letting it settle, moving the stone wall, it's just gonna look so aesthetically and so much nicer on Sandy Street. And eventually we'll have more graves because truly we're running out. Everybody's running out. So eventually it will look really, really nice.
What, things that have been dumped there, what are you talking about? Is it
Garbage, anything you can think of, garbage.
old refrigerators, car? I mean,
No,
what are we
no,
talking-
nothing to do. Just
Don't give them any ideas,
garbage,
Carl.
logs, you know, whatever they want to dump. You know, they just, whatever they decide to drive by and so, look, nobody's looking, I'm going to dump, there's no cameras, I'm going to dump something in there. So we have a rope there now saying don't dump there, and we plan on cleaning it out right down to the bottom so that the stump's removed, all the garbage removed, it's clean fill, packed in there, putting a stone wall in there and just making it look aesthetically nicer, and then eventually putting graves in there. It's going to take a while.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chairman, typically the board does allow for the resolution to be at the next meeting as long as the applicant addresses the comments that I provide. That's what we've done in the past, so.
So
Sorry to step on your
the
toes
addresses
there.
and comments will all be referred to the ECB.
Right, but you can also have the resolution go forward if you wanted to for the next week's meeting. That's what your next meeting.
But
So
then
Prepare the
does that
resolution.
bypass the public hearing?
We
we don't normally have a public hearing for
The
this.
regrading is not mandatory.
That's up to you, that's up to the board.
Your call.
We've had several regrading applications in front of us over the last few years. Have we had public hearings with those?
You have, because many of them have been controversial. They've affected neighbors' properties and grades of neighboring properties. That's not the case here. In fact, it's sort of the opposite. This has been a problem site over the years, so this is an effort to clean that up.
Jeff, where's the nearest neighbor?
Excuse me?
Where's the nearest neighbor?
When I was out there, I couldn't see one, so I'm going to have to ask Wendy. Wendy, come on.
Across the street.
Actually, the nearest neighbors are, if you go down just maybe like 10 feet on the right-hand side is Memory Lane. So you have that area. If you go up the opposite way, like, you go up the opposite way, whatever, you have Dave O'Meara on Union Valley Road, and then you have like just Union Valley Road residents. We've all lived across the cemetery for most of our lives, and we all want it to look nice. We all want it to.
I know there's a new house on Sandy, too.
Yeah, there's, right, exactly, new house there too, but we all want it to look really nice, and we want the cemetery to be taken care of, and so I think, there's a sign up there, people are welcome to come here, and I don't believe that anybody would object to what we plan on doing. I think they're gonna be really happy. They don't wanna see the garbage there anymore.
Mr. Chairman, if you're concerned, what you can do is schedule the public hearing for the next meeting and also have the approval resolutions ready.
I'd rather do that also. I just, I don't like waiving public hearings personally. I just think the neighbors should have an opportunity. We can do them both in parallel.
Yeah, this way you don't lose any time.
Yeah.
We generally stay consistent, so we do stay consistent. So we need a motion.
Yeah.
Make a motion to schedule a public hearing for the Union Valley Cemetery.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That's great.
Great. So the board will make the referral to the ECB. We'll go ahead and work on the notices with Rose and get that taken care of, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, we do two things in
Right.
parallel.
Resolution.
Okay, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And then, yeah, it's really, we get both done. Taco Bell.
Taco Bell, public hearing, amended site plan. Okay, speaking to the microphones for those that aren't. Sure. Mike?
Yeah, this is on for public hearing. All of my comments have been addressed. They are ready to go.
Matt?
All the site planning issues have been addressed, Mr. Chairman. This is on for public hearing.
Rich?
All engineering comments have been addressed. It's on for public hearing.
Comments from the board?
Do we have a tenant yet on the other side?
I don't believe so, no. I don't believe they've started to market that space yet.
Any comments from the audience? This is a public hearing.
I can't hear nothing.
Any comments from the public to be heard on Taco Bell?
Being there's no public comment, I'll make a motion to close the hearing.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And Pat, you'll prepare a resolution?
Will do, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Homeland Towers, Lake Cassie, 254 Croton Falls Road, site plan. Mike?
Yeah, this application,
Excuse me.
We keep it down, please?
this application's still in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals. So that is open at the same time as this. I have no additional comments at this time.
Pat?
So this is before the Zoning Board of Appeals. At the last meeting, several issues were raised. The first was the board requested that we retain independent consultant to review the property appraisal report that had been submitted by the applicant. We're in the process of retaining a consultant. We should have that secured this week. The second issue related to the information related to the State Historic Preservation Office that was delivered to you from a neighbor. We have been in contact, and you asked us to sort that out with SHPO. We've been in contact with SHPO. In fact, they are in the process of designating that adjacent property as for listing on the Federal and State Historic Preservation Register. The SHPO has indicated that a property that is eligible gets treated the same way a listed property does. So you are obligated to take that into consideration in your evaluation of this application. In regard to that, because the FCC is involved in this application, there is a federal historic preservation review process. It's called Section 106 that the applicant must comply with. So he now must go through that process as well, and he's undertaking that process as we speak. So that has to be addressed as well. And those are the two issues we were addressing prior to the last meeting. No further comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Rich?
Applicant has not acknowledged the need for referrals to Mahopac Falls Fire Department, New York City DEP, and New York State DEC. The applicant should note that these are referrals. The permits would be needed for New York State DEC, general permit under stormwater, and they have met with New York City DEP, and per the applicant, the DEP would not require any permits. The applicant will need to have this in writing from the New York City DEP, and the applicant will need to meet with the Town Environmental Conservation Board. Just going back to the New York State DEC, the DEP, they provided a letter today dated September 10th regarding the, and I just have it here, I don't know if the board had a chance to see it, but based on the watershed rules and regulations, the parcel involves the use of our existing right-of-way over New York City water supply land. It serves residential property and is solely for the purpose of ingress and egress. Based on aerial mapping and field investigation, it appears two private properties are utilizing the right-of-way. The DEP has to do further research on what property is served by the ROW, the right-of-way. We need to determine if the DEP will need to determine if commercial use by a third party is acceptable use of the ROW, and if the current landowner has the right to grant such use. So there was a letter out there. I don't know if the board saw that, had seen that. I just wanted to pass that along with regards to dealing with the DEP and right-of-ways. So area of disturbance, they know that a SWIP, a stormwater pollution prevention plan is needed. It's only 15,000 square feet, so it's erosion sediment controls only. Some more detailed comments. The proposed tower exceeds the maximum height permitted under the code, which is capped at 50 feet. In accordance with the code, the applicant must provide justification for exceeding this cap. Even with relief from it, the maximum height is 50% more than the 50 feet, which would be 75 feet. The applicant is proposing a tower of 140 feet. The application proposes a tower at a priority 5 site. The applicant must provide an explanation as why why a higher priority has not been selected. Requirements of 156-62 of the code must be met. Requirements set forth in 156-62-0 have not been provided. These comments have been acknowledged by the applicant, and they should be the information should be provided for planning board counsel for review. And that's about it.
Thank you, Rich. Mr. Guardioso, would you like to reply?
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Robert Gaudioso with the law firm of Snyder & Snyder on behalf of the applicants. This is a continued public hearing. We did receive the DEP letter. We'll provide a response to that as well as the response to the SHPO issue, and we'll look forward to the appraisal report hopefully in due time.
Since this is a public hearing, anyone wish to be heard tonight? Preferably new issues, but I'm happy to address and listen to anyone. Please state your name.
Good evening, members of the board. Mr. Chairman, my name is Andrew Campanelli. I'm an attorney. My office address is 1757 Merrick Avenue, Suite 204, Merrick, New York. Good evening. I represent roughly between 30 and 40 homeowners who are opposed to this and the other application. I've come for you this evening, even though I've never been before this board, none of you are familiar with me. I handle a substantial number of cell tower cases, not just across the entire state of New York, but across the entire United States. It's kind of my forte, especially the Telecommunications Act of 1996. I'm admitted to federal courts in 23 jurisdictions within which I handle these cases. I come for you tonight with several objectives in mind. The first, of course, is to persuade the board why, consistent with Article 8, Chapter 156-62 of your code, this application should be denied because it would not only violate the letter of the code, but the intent of the code, meaning if this tower to be installed, it would inflict upon the nearby homes the precise types of adverse impacts which your code was adopted to prevent. It is not, unfortunately, enough to simply persuade you to deny the application. Given my background in the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996, it is of equal import to me that it's denied for, number one, a validly legal reason, meaning a reason that does not run afoul of the Federal Telecommunications Act, and that it's denied in a manner which does not violate the Telecommunications Act. I apologize if I try to give some type of instructions. It's habit at the request of representatives of the state of New York and the New York State Association of Towns. I lecture and give seminars across the state to teach towns how to apply their codes in a way that doesn't violate the code and how to exercise maximum power to regulate the placement of these facilities in their jurisdictions without violating the code. So I apologize if I go long, but I do invite any questions about anything. So, for starters, I want to talk about the adverse impacts which the irresponsible placement of a 140-foot tower would affect, how it would affect the nearby properties. And I'm going to start by saying that I'm going to assume that it's going to be a 140-foot tower, but as I'll explain later, if you approve the application as it stands, it is extremely unlikely that this tower is going to be 140 feet. At a minimum, I would suggest to you the tower is going to be 160 feet, and I'll explain to you exactly why. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is the adverse aesthetic impacts, and that's a very important thing to analyze in cases of this nature. Significantly, the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, which is the second highest court that covers these cases, it's second only to the U.S. Supreme Court. The United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit has explicitly and consistently ruled that adverse aesthetic impacts are a valid legal basis upon which to deny applications of this type. Now, 2 days ago, I submitted 18 copies of memorandums in opposition and supporting exhibits to explain to the board. I hope you've got them. I don't know if you had a chance to see them. I think they should have been uploaded on the site as well, but explaining the adverse impacts that would be sustained by the nearby homes. In addition, I've included detailed letters from the homeowners explicitly detailing from their perspectives the precise types of adverse impacts they would sustain. There's a reason that I submitted these letters, personalized letters from the homeowners. The reason is, according to the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, these letters should be accepted as substantial evidence of the actual impact they would sustain, because the federal judge ruled that the persons in the best position to know and understand the precise adverse aesthetic impact they will sustain are the homeowners themselves. And so there is case law and citations provided in my brief saying this is evidence. And I use the word substantial evidence for a reason. To ensure that this board's decision complies with the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996, whatever your decision you make must satisfy several criteria. Number one, I'm going to ask you to make factual determinations. The reason is if you fail to make factual determinations, then I assure you Mr. Gaudioso won't hesitate to go into federal court and have a federal court make those determinations for you. Second, to the extent that you make those determinations, you must issue them in a separate written decision, and those determinations must be based upon substantial evidence, and you need to identify that evidence in your decision. I do not mean to lecture you, but in case after case across the United States, I've seen local governments render the right decision and make a mistake and not meet these criteria, and the next thing you know, I got a federal judge 90 days later ordering the town to give them the permit. And so I'm trying to avoid that. So you have both letters and you have images. You have color images of the crane test that was performed by the applicant at 140 feet. I ask you to look at those photographic images and take a hard look and recognize the severe adverse aesthetic impact it would inflict upon these homes. The letters are annexed to my brief as exhibit. Well, one is Exhibit B, Exhibit C, and the photographs, color photographs, are Exhibit D. These are actual photocollographs taken from the crane test. Once again, this is at 140 feet, but I would say the odds of that tower ultimately being 160 feet or higher are probably at least 85%, and I'll tell you why in a little while. Now, not surprisingly, Homeland has submitted a visual impact analysis. And as I've seen in every single case when I've gone up against Homeland Towers, it is inherently defective. They're always defective. This is slightly better than the garbage they usually submit, but it's still defective, and here's why. If you read the OmniPoint case, the federal judge is very clear. The whole purpose of a visual impact analysis is to give this board an accurate understanding of the actual adverse aesthetic impacts that these homes are going to sustain. And so when a carrier did something much like Homeland did in this case, the court said the board was free to discount their analysis because the only photographs included in their analysis are taken from public roads, okay? There is not a single photograph taken from the actual homes which are going to sustain those adverse impacts. As the federal court said, there's no pictures from the second-story windows of their backyards, okay? They deliberately omit taking photographs because they want to minimize the actual adverse aesthetic impact that they're going to see. And this is defective as a matter of law. You should ignore their study entirely. Now, sometimes carriers or site developers like Homeland will say, well, you know, we can't trespass on property. That's nonsense, okay? Because I have 3 cases right now in New York where it's very simple. The board said, you're going to give us an aesthetic impact statement? Go to the homeowners, ask them to step on the property. If they tell you can't, that's justification for not taking photos from their property. But if you don't ask, you simply go in the front of the house and stand behind a tree or a fence like one of their photos has, it's hogwash. This is an inherently defective visual impact analysis. This board should not ignore it in its entirety, just like the Federal Court of Appeals says you should, number 1. And again, that's at 140. 160 is going to be worse. Second, a second perfectly valid grounds, oh, by the way, that is entirely consistent with your code. Your code specifically says the very purpose for which those requirements are imposed under the section that pertains to wireless facilities is to minimize the adverse aesthetic impacts. In fact, whereas here the applicant wants to get more than 50 feet, they have to prove, it's their burden to prove by clear and convincing evidence before this board that the height proposed and the location proposed will minimize the adverse aesthetic impact on the community. There is no way they can meet that standard given this location and this height. With regard to property values, ask any local real estate broker who will tell you the truth. They'll tell you what professional experts have determined for years. When a cell tower is placed unnecessarily close to a home, it reduces the value of those homes, point blank. As outlined in my brief, is an argument why and how it will reduce the value of the homes and why the application should be denied based upon same. Now, once again, I need you to make a decision based upon substantial evidence. Federal courts have ruled that professional opinion letters from real estate brokers are substantial evidence. Why? Number 1, they're licensed professionals. Number 2, the letters that I've submitted to you are not just from any real estate brokers. They're real estate brokers who are licensed professionals who have been practicing here for years. They not only have an understanding of real estate markets in general, they have an acute understanding of this specific real estate market here. And in their professional opinion, if this tower goes up, it's going to reduce the value of the nearby homes by up to 30%. That is a substantial reduction in the property values. And of equal import, federal judge say that's evidence. You don't need appraisals. You definitely don't want appraisals like the Lane appraisal, which I'll get into in a minute. But according to federal courts, the exact type of letters that I've given you are substantial evidence of the actual adverse reduction in property values the nearby homes will suffer. Now, what has the applicant offered you? The Lane appraisal. I don't need an expert, and nobody needs an expert to know that the Lane appraisal is garbage. I haven't seen the one for this tower. I wasn't aware until tonight that Homeland submitted Lane appraisals. I've seen these things before. If you look at the Lane appraisal, it has 0 probative value. Here's why. What are they telling you? They're allegedly telling you that they've looked at houses, and here's the resale value, and this is what that breaks down to on a per square foot basis. I don't even know if any of the homes they cite are actually in Carmel. I haven't looked. If they are, it's the first time I've ever seen it. In every single one of these appraisals, they cite houses that are not in your town, so you can't even go look at them. You have no way of knowing if anybody in these houses can actually see the tower if it goes up. But what do you know about the value of a home based upon square footage? Nothing. You have no idea of the nature of these homes. Is this home a dilapidated shack that hasn't been updated since 1954? And usually they give you before and after. They bought it for this, and they sold it for that. They stopped doing that. And the reason they did that is because they used to object and say, wait a minute, you have no idea why the value went up. Was it a shack and a flipper? Did the person who buy it strip it, put an all brand new roof, brand new furnace, fireplace, kitchen, bathroom, built-in pool? You have no idea. You know absolutely nothing about the homes in this appraisal except the square footage and the price. This has the probative value of a comic strip. It proves nothing. Don't take what they give you as gospel because it's a joke. So, Unlike them, we've provided probative evidence, substantial evidence of the actual adverse impacts on property values and of greatest import at 140 feet, which is more probably than not the height this tower is going to be. So let's talk about what height the tower is going to be. One of the problems the board faces is that if you approve a tower for 140 feet, the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012, once the tower is built, Homeland would, as a matter of law, go in and increase the height of that tower by at least 20 feet, and this board would be powerless to stop them. There's nothing you can do. Now, with one exception, I'll get into in a minute. How do you know how tall the tower is going to be? If they tell you they want 140, what can you're not a mind reader. How can you tell if they're going to go far higher? There's two indicia. First, look at what they came for. They didn't come here to build a tower for 140 feet. They came here looking for a taller tower. That's their intent. I didn't make it up. They put in their papers. That's what they want, no question about it. Well, how do you know if that's still their intent if they've amended their application to 140? The answer? Look at the base. Look at the base of the tower. The base of a tower for a 140-foot tower is substantially different than the base of the tower for a 180-foot tower. The only plans I've seen submitted to the town show a structural base that's designed to accommodate a much taller tower than 140. The weight of a 180-foot tower and the wind resistance it has to put up with is substantially heavier. And I'll tell you this, in 27 years of doing this, I've never seen a site developer, and Homeland is a site developer, it's not a wireless carrier, it doesn't provide any wireless services. In 27 years, I've never seen a site developer pay for a base for a 180-foot tower if they only intended to support a 140-foot tower. They're not going to pay for that. So look at the base. Now, final issue on this is, can you stop it? What happens if you approve a 140-foot tower? Can you stop it? And there's only one way to stop it. And the only way to stop it is if the property owner themselves agrees to sign a covenant running with the land that the tower will never be higher than 140. A restrictive covenant in your decision, even if it's done on consent, will not be enforceable. And the reason it won't be is because if you do it that way, there is nothing stopping Homeland from simply adding the 20 feet and putting the burden upon you to then force them to take it down. And when you do, the argument will be that you had no right to do that because your ability to make them consent to a limit is preempted by the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012. So they can't agree to a restrictive covenant in whatever approval you grant them. It has to be a covenant running with the deed. I'm sorry I threw a lot of information at you. Any questions by anybody so far? I wish Mom was here. She said I wouldn't amount to much.
I think that was very informative.
Thank you.
Questions from the board?
Mr. Campanelli, would you just restate what you talked about with the covenant and the only way to restrict it?
Okay.
That it would stand.
So there's many cases where wireless infrastructure companies or carriers agree to things, whether it's in a contract for a limitation, whether it's a restrictive covenant. But when they do so, nothing is to stop them from claiming that it's unenforceable or prohibited. I'll give you a perfect example. On Long Island, in Westchester, I think it was, the Sprint case. Sprint went to a school district and wanted to put a cell tower on top of a school district. And they approached the school district and said, okay, we're willing to lease space, but we've spoken to experts, and we'll lease space for a cell tower, but we're going to put a restriction in the lease that says the radiation level that comes off your tower can't go above a certain level. And Sprint said, fine, we'll sign the contract, because it's on top of a school. And so the school district wanted to protect the students. They signed the agreement, Sprint built the tower with a specific provision that says, no way can you allow this to have it expose members of the public to higher radiation levels. 6 months after it was installed, Sprint came back and said, listen, we have to update our equipment. That's not enforceable. We're going to increase the power output. And the school district said, we're going to sue you. You're not going to do this. We're going to sue you, and there's going to be a public relations disaster for you. So Sprint didn't want to get sued first, so Sprint sued the school district. And went before the court and said, this is preempted, okay? The Federal Telecommunications Act preempts local governments from telling us what level of radiation can go off of these towers, even though we signed a contract agreeing to it. And in that case, there was one exception that the court ruled. They said, wait a minute, the difference here is when the school district signed the lease, it wasn't acting in a regulatory capacity like this board. The court said, federal court, that the board was acting in a proprietary capacity, just like a regular commercial landlord. And only because the board was acting like a commercial landlord and not a regulatory body, the covenant was enforceable. But if the covenant was entered by a planning board, it would not be enforceable. And it's the same way with restrictive covenants in zoning approvals. You understand? So even if they agree to it,
Landowner would have to.
the only way it's enforceable is if the landowner themselves signs a restrictive covenant that runs with a deed that says no tower is ever being built taller than 140 feet. That's enforceable. But anything in the context of the zoning signed by them, not going to be enforceable. The worst part is what they do is they just build it. And now you have to sue them and spend money. So I'm just telling you, I'm doing this a long time. This is what happens.
Do you happen to know the case caption of that?
I can get you the citation. I've cited it so many times, I just don't remember off the top of my head.
Sprint,
Yeah.
okay.
I'll send it to you.
That'd be great, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So the next issue, of course, we come to is need, and that's very important. There are several different constraints which govern what local governments can and cannot do if there's a need. Not surprisingly, in most of the cases I encounter, when the applicant is a site developer as opposed to a carrier, more often than not, the need actually doesn't exist. I can tell you in my experience, if Verizon had a substantial gap in its personal wireless services, the application will be filed by Verizon, not a site developer. Homeland Towers does not provide any personal wireless services. It does not need any tower of any kind to fill any gap in its services simply because it doesn't provide any. Now, Verizon does have its own database. Verizon has a database for the world. All of its coverage areas are compiled in a database which is linked to a software program which allows you to type in an address and to analyze the coverage that exists at any precise location. Wonderfully for us, that database and site is accessible to the public. All you have to do is go to the internet, go to Verizon.com, and go to its coverage map. And when you go to its coverage map, you can type in any address, and when you type in that address, their software program will access its database, and it will show you two very important pieces of information. Number one, it's going to show you any gaps in service. When I say gaps, significant gaps in service, because that's a legal term. It'll show you any significant gaps in service, and number two, it'll show you the coverage level. That's different than a gap. A gap is where an area you drive through and your phone call drops, okay? You can't maintain a call. Level of coverage often goes to capacity. They may have an area covered, but the equipment is such that during heavy traffic times, they can't hold all the calls, okay? In Verizon's functional system, it shows you gaps in coverage and coverage by red and white colors, and the capacity and coverage quality is defined by level. Its levels, as defined by Verizon, are no coverage, fair, good, and excellent. So 6 days ago, I logged into Verizon's own database and ran an analysis of Verizon's coverage, the precise types of coverage they're talking about at the precise area where they're claiming there's a significant gap. If you look at Exhibit N, attached to the memorandum I gave you, the exhibits, I deliberately gave this in color. This shows you at the precise location where they're claiming that Verizon has a significant gap in personal wireless services. According to the Verizon's own database, there are no gaps in, at, or anywhere near this site. That's Verizon. That's not PureCom. That's not Homeland. That's Verizon. Now, if you look on the left-hand corner, you'll see this is for the right address where the tower is proposed, and it describes the level of coverage as good. That's the level of coverage at this site. It doesn't say fair. It doesn't say gaps. So according to Verizon, they have no gaps in service. Consistent, I should say entirely consistent with that, I've seen the PureCon Solutions reports, who describe themselves as specialists in wireless systems. I don't think there's a agree for that, but they kind of gave themselves that name. Remarkably absent from both of PeerCon's submissions is one shred of hard data, okay? I would say for 27 years, in 90% of the cases I've handled, I would say in 90% the applicant has always submitted false or misleading information. I've seen applicants come in with propagation maps which were as bad as comic strips. They meant nothing. They can make color charts showing anything, okay? They have no probative value, just as these PeerCon Solutions reports, okay? For example, if you read them carefully, you're going to read about modeling. Everything they gave you is based upon modeling. There is no hard data. What is hard data? It's really very simple, okay? If an applicant wants to show there's a significant gap in personal wireless services, there's one very easy way to do it, and it's a drive test. It's the simplest thing in the world. They take a phone, they put a recording device on the phone, they put it on the dashboard of a car, and they drive through the area for several hours. That phone records signal strengths every few milliseconds, and they have that recording. You take a 2-hour drive, you'll have 300,000 recordings, okay? Those recordings show the actual signal strength. You don't have any of them. They claim a drive test was done. They haven't given you one actual recorded signal strength. What they did was modeling. What does that mean? They take the actual signal strength and they multiply it by various fractions to reduce the number to any preconceived number they want. They do it all the time. In PeerCon's reports, for example, they say, you know, we had to make a reduction in the signal because we had to account for foliage that didn't exist yet, which is kind of interesting because they don't explain how foliage, I don't know what foliage you get up here, but I'm not sure what kind of foliage is going to block a signal from a 140-foot tower. I haven't seen any trees that tall around here. I don't know if you have, okay? There is no explanation, nor is there an explanation why they haven't given you the hard data. If I were this board, I would demand to see the actual hard data. That's number one. What about capacity? Because even if you have coverage, how do you know whether or not there's a capacity issue? That one's even easier. You see, Verizon and every carrier, they have computer databases that have all of this information. So when there's a gap in coverage, all they have to do is hit a few keystrokes, and Verizon's own computer system will print out a list of all your drop calls. They can tell you by location, chronological period, date, time, exactly how many drop calls they have in any specific geographic area. They haven't given you a shred of it. None of it. What do they give you? Well, you know, we have these capacity problems and there's some drop call rates. Between all of the PeerCon Solutions reports, they've gotten worse rather than better. I'll tell you why. Usually what I'm accustomed to seeing is when they say, well, Verizon needs this. They really need it because Verizon's position is anytime the drop call rate drops below 2%, that shows they need this. And that's not true, okay? Drop call rates below 2% do not establish that there's a significant gap in personal wireless service. Even worse on the other side, Dixon. Some of their records show drop call rates as low as 0.05% or 1%. That in no way reflects a significant gap in personal wireless services. In fact, it shows nothing, and the reason is, if 98% of your calls are getting through, how do you know, first of all, that's good enough coverage for the Telecommunications Act, I'll tell you right now. But what do you think is causing the other 2%? You have no way of knowing whether the call was dropped because the coverage from the other provider fell off. Why would 98% go through and the 2% not, unless perhaps it's the coverage from the other person on the other end of the phone? In similar vein, you have no way of knowing perhaps the person's cell phone died, or they inadvertently hit a button. You have, right now before you, you have zero hard data. You have fluff. And this in no way proves that they have a significant gap in service, much less that the only possible ways of remedying that gap is to put this tower at this site for 140 feet. They haven't even come close to meeting that requirement. Not even close. So that's addressed in, yes.
Do you have any court cases? Do you have any court cases that focus on the quality of the hard data versus modeling that you just articulated?
I couldn't name one off the top of my head, and most of my cases, most of them, never go to court. And the reason they don't go to court is when I go to the board, I try to act as an advocate and an educator. I make the record so solid that the applicant doesn't file a federal lawsuit.
I wasn't asking about your cases. I'm asking about reported cases in general.
I'd have to look. I can't name any off the top of my head. There have been cases on the other side where people did call tests and it was ruled to be anecdotal, but I've handled.
It would be helpful if you could supply.
I'll look for it. So again, when I look at PureCon's report and I see things like seamless communications, or for example, it says on page 3, purpose and scope, it says PureCon Solutions obtained applicable engineering data. They don't tell you what the data is. They tell you that Verizon relied on ATOL to give them data. ATOL is a modeling tool. It gives possible projections of a possible coverage, and everybody knows that's inaccurate, and here's why. Okay, if someone in Michigan prepares software and says, well, if the world was flat and there were trees and this was our tower, this is how far it would go. Okay. You don't know. ATOL is never accurate because it doesn't account for changes in elevation, obstructions, buildings, trees. You have no idea. The only way to know if they have a capacity problem is the drop call records, and if they have a significant gap in service, the actual hard data, which they should have. It's easy for them to give it to you. And then, even if they give you the hard data, make them tell you what they consider a significant gap in service to be. Because federal courts say, look, simply having a gap in service doesn't force a town to grant an application. If it's a small geographic area, no. If it's a few people, no. The gap has to be a significant gap in service before the Telecommunications Act of 1996 can compel a board to grant the application. That's the standard of what's called the Prohibition of Personal Wireless Services standard. And this is what this means. There is a constraint of the Telecommunications Act that says, basically, even if it violates every facet of your code, you must grant the application if denying the application would be the equivalent of prohibiting personal wireless services. Now, for Homeland to prove that it meets that standard, it has to prove two things by clear and convincing evidence. First, that it has a significant gap in its personal wireless services, and two, that the proposed installation is the least intrusive means of remedying that gap in services. And based upon the submissions I've seen, they haven't met either of those criteria, neither of them. I also see the note to in-building coverage. In-building coverage is the best bait and switch in the world. In-building coverage talks about coverage in a building. So what does that mean? Very often what they'll do is they'll go and they'll do a drive test and record the actual signal strengths, and they may even give you the signal strengths. And then they say, well, yeah, there's plenty of coverage outside, but our problem is we have a gap in in-building coverage. And to account for the reduction in signal strength we will lose when the signal passes through the materials of which a building is made, we got to account for that, so we do a reduction. If they want to know what the coverage is inside a building, all they have to do is walk in and test it. I had a case where an RF engineer testified, we have no coverage in building. And so I asked him, by the way, did you look at the site? Yeah, I looked at the site. Did you go inside? Yeah, while you were there, did you make any phone calls? And he was dead silent. And he said, yeah, who'd you call? My wife in Virginia. How long did you talk to her for? 20 minutes. Were you able to initiate, maintain, and conclude that call without failure? Yes. And that's in the building where you claim you have a significant gap in in-building coverage, which precludes the ability of anyone from maintaining a call. So that's the kind of nonsense I see on a regular basis, which is why it's imperative that you obtain hard data. I think I've covered most of what I want to cover this evening. Of course, the other issues with regard to the historical status of the property, I'm not going to get into. There is one other concern I have, which is far greater on the other site, but I would touch on it here. Among the many things I have to acquaint zoning boards with is the risk of fire with cell towers. The average person looks at a cell tower and the last thing on their mind would be a fire. You wouldn't think so. But almost like clockwork, at least once a month, a cell tower in the United States goes up on fire. There are multiple cases. I've shown you in the briefs I've submitted, especially the Dixon Road. I've shown you 5-color photos. The most famous case was Wellesley, Massachusetts, where a monopole, not too unsimilar from the ones they want to put up here, ignited in flames and laid over in a burning heap. And what struck me about that case is, first of all, there's all kinds of videos on YouTube. Just go on YouTube and type cell tower burns to the ground. What got me was the cell tower's on a main road. There's hundreds of cars passing by. And this thing went up so fast and collapsed so fast that the firefighters had no chance to put it out. Now, when I look at these locations, I look at Croton Falls and I look at Dixon, Croton Falls especially, and I think about the possibility of a Wellesley fire like that taking place there. When a fire truck, if they wanted to get there, they'd have to go over that easement, past the brick wall. Forget it. They'll never make it there. And you would definitely be putting homes at risk. So I ask you to look at the fire information. And I'm not asking you to take my word for it. The documentation you have before you. There are dozens and dozens of cell tower fires. Happens all the time. Just real quick, I'll see if I can finish up. Okay, so just finally, again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I would ask specifically that the board remember at the end of the day, whatever your decision is, please make sure that you make a separate written decision. You make the factual determinations I'm asking you to make, because speaking quite candidly, federal judges hate these cases. If you make a decision and it gets challenged, as long as you cite the evidence upon which you made your factual determination, a federal judge doesn't want to be a zoning board of appeals. So they'll usually leave it intact, as long as you cite the evidence based upon which you made your conclusion. And just one final note, because I heard somebody murmur this before, it's always a concern, the applicant threatens, we'll have a federal court decide this. If you go against us, we'll file a suit. That is one of the most hollow threats I've ever seen. I mean, I've handled federal lawsuits across the entire United States, and by far, the cheapest federal lawsuit, as weird as that sounds, is a Telecommunications Act lawsuit. Because even if you do something, somehow, that violates the act, and even if Homeland sues you in federal court, the only thing they get is a permit. They can't get damages, and they can't get attorney's fees. So when people come in and there's suggestions that, Verizon's going to bankrupt the town, it's a legal and factual impossibility. The case is essentially decided as a motion. There's a provision of the Telecommunications Act which makes it an expedited proceeding. The complaint is almost in the form of a motion. The court reviews it, simply looks at the record you had before you, see if there was a basis upon which you made your decision, and if that decision violated the act. It's very fast, it's very inexpensive, and Verizon gets nothing. If they win, they get a permit and nothing more. So any threat of litigation is an entirely hollow threat, and this is coming from someone who's done it for more than 2 decades. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a list up there. There's a list up there.
Yeah, I'd like the opportunity to respond, Mr. Chairman.
There's a list up there we signed to speak.
I'd like to have the opportunity to
Is it
respond
going
to
to go
that.
behind everybody? This is not right. This is our hearing, public hearing.
I'd also say,
Use the microphone.
It's our turn to speak. You
We've
can have a
listened,
seat.
a lot of folks who have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go to work have listened to Mr. Guardioso for several months. This is a public hearing. People are waiting to speak. This is not a debate. We've listened to the solo acts of Mr. Guardioso for quite some time. This is our turn to speak.
Let me follow up.
I opened the meeting up before to the public. I plan on continuing to the public, so the public can be heard. You'll have your chance, Mr. Guardioso.
Thank you.
Thank you. He said you'll get a chance, not now.
I opened the meeting up to the public. This is still the public meeting. Our first speaker was there. I want to know if anyone else from the public wants to be heard tonight.
I do.
So I just reserve my opportunity to speak at the end. Thank you.
I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Preferably for the speakers, for everyone's benefit, if it hasn't, please do not repeat things throughout the night. Bob, for everyone's benefit.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
If it's not new news, try to refrain.
I'm not going to repeat anything our attorney said for the most part.
I'm just asking as a courtesy
I
to everyone
respect the
else
board here for
And
that.
everyone in the public will have a chance to speak tonight.
I have 3 letters that some of the residents were unable to submit to you. I was unable to make copies, Mr. Chairman, so I'm going to give you the 3 letters. If you could possibly get the copies to the board members, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
Of opposition to the cell tower.
Leave these for Rose.
So my name is Robert Buckley. I live on Eleanor Drive, and almost all the residents on Eleanor Drive get a direct view of the proposed cell tower. Those pictures that you see were taken by me. But before I move forward about what I want to say about these pictures or anything else, did the town hire a consultant, a cell tower consultant to advise you in any capacity? Do you guys have a cell tower?
Yeah, his name is Graf? Grave, Ron Grave.
Ron who? Grave. All right, I did some research on Ron
I think
Graves.
you know that, by the way.
I didn't know if you hired him or not. I did. Well, here's what I would like to do. I would like our attorney at some point to speak about that, because I could speak about it, but I can't articulate as good as our attorney. If someone's not going to speak, if they can give him their 3 minutes, because I'll go behind the attorney and speak, but I think this is an important issue that needs to be addressed. Can you speak about that?
Okay. Ronald Grafe. If Ronald Grafe was hired by the town and you agreed to pay him, then I think there's a problem. And the reason is, Ronald Grafe has been fired by at least one previous municipality I'm aware of for not disclosing his conflict of interest. You see, Ronald Grafe is a closely held shareholder of a corporation which owns a cell tower. And one of their principal customers for more than a decade that pays thousands of dollars a month to his closely held corporation is Verizon. So every month for years, Mr. Grafe has been receiving money from Verizon, and the odds of him now coming before a board and giving a report, which is going to say Verizon, my tenant is claiming they have a gap but doesn't, I think is hard to swallow. Unfortunately, Mr. Grafe has failed to disclose this in the past in other jurisdictions, and I know of at least one other jurisdiction when the minute they found out this was the case, they fired him. And I assure you, Mr. Godioso is going to jump to say Mr. Grafe did a wonderful job in this case, acknowledging there's a significant gap. But I think it's very problematic. Look, if Mr. Grafe, maybe I'm wrong, maybe Mr. Grafe disclosed to you that Verizon is his customer, paying him thousands of dollars a month. But if he hasn't, that's a conflict of interest the size of the Queen Mary, and I would ask you to seriously take a look at, consider Mr. Grafe's opinion viewed against that backdrop. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess my first question would be, is this board aware that Mr. Grace was in bed with Verizon and had a contract with them?
Mr. Chairman, I have to...
I never interrupted him. He can't do this. This is not court. This is a public
I'm
hearing.
not sure your choice of words is correct. Bob, I'm not sure your choice of words was the most accurate.
All right,
there.
I'll rephrase the question since the attorney got behind me. Is this board aware of any way, shape, or form that your consultant, Ron Grace, has a relationship with Verizon or any cell towers? Has that been made aware to this board?
I don't think anyone's seen the contract from Mr. Graves or what.
Okay.
arrangements there are.
Being
I don't know.
that it seems to me that that was not disclosed to this board, for starters, we have a major, major conflict of interest here. Right? We got the defense on the baseball team playing for the other side. It's a bad situation. And you guys really need to look, and ladies need to look into that and decide how you want to handle it. He's been fired once, and I think you might have to think about it again. All right? I got some other stuff we'll talk about, but the problem with that is we're all aware of the shot clock. And I'm going to ask you about the shot clock, and I'm pretty sure everybody's aware of the shot clock in here, but I'll say it as quick as I can. There's a set amount of days that if this board doesn't make a decision within that time period, Homeland Towers basically is just granted the permit, the okay to build their cell tower. So when that time frame comes up, I forget, how many days is it? What is it? 150 days. So they already reached 150 days. They got one extension, maybe a second extension. The question is, or the concern is, if Homeland Towers, and by the way, when our attorney, who we have much respect for, was speaking, there was a lot of laughing going on behind me. Yes. I didn't appreciate that. Yes, our attorney was doing a professional job representing us. Please don't laugh when our residents are speaking, our attorney. This is not a joke. This is going to cost us a lot of money. We're very concerned about it. So back to the shot clock. Here's my concern. They realize now that maybe this board's going to take an action, and they may see the writing on the wall, And if they're going to not extend the shot clock, I would ask that you reconvene and have a meeting and deny the application. Do not allow the shot clock to run out, please. So with that, I'm going to move on to a few of the things. Thank you. I'm not going to reread my letter. The attorney pretty much said it all. I'm just going to touch on a few other things. I was reading the town code regarding zoning, and it starts out very interesting. The town board finds that the regulation of the wireless telecommunication facility is necessary to protect the predominantly suburban and rural residential character of the town and the property values of the community. Right? So that's what the code says, and that's what we're concerned about. Those pictures that our attorney submitted to you, I took them all. I'm a photographer. None of them were edited. When I looked at my pictures, I went down to the house where the entrance on 254 Croton Falls Road is. I was given permission to go behind that house, and I think that's owned by Emily Borelli. I went to her backyard, and I took a shot through the house, and I was in disbelief. It was like a big middle finger sticking up at me. But in front of the house, the pool, I was like, wow, how could they live here with that cell tower if it was ever to be accepted? I went up on Eleanor Drive, and you have the pictures. And I didn't edit none of them. But then when I looked at the pictures that were submitted by Homeland Towers, and because I do a little photography, I noticed that they were strategically placed to kind of, if this was up there, to kind of make it look like it was down there. They were flawed. A lot of the things they do are flawed. They talk about so many issues, and I didn't realize they had a reputation of being inconsistent and not always, as our attorney said, don't take what they say as gospel. So I'm in agreement with that. So that was the photographs. Homeland Towers has stated that cell towers can increase the value of your home. I don't know where they came up with that. That's pretty comical. I spoke to one of their representatives on the phone for 45 minutes, and he actually said that to me. And then I heard that they said it some more. Cell towers do not increase the value of your home, especially in a residential community, with homeowners with families. Maybe they could statistically find that in Brooklyn, downtown Manhattan, where you have millennials living. But I can assure you, in rural, residential, Mahopac and Carmel, we are not going to get an increase in value of our home by having a cell tower immediately behind or in front of our home. That's not going to happen. Let's talk about the values and the adverse impacts of the cell tower sitting at 140 feet in the sky. Does it really impact the value of your home? Let me give you an analogy and tell you if you actually believe this story. I'm going to give you my example. My example was the top of my driveway. My house is down in the valley. When I'm in my house, you wouldn't see the cell tower too much from down below. But as soon as you pull in my driveway, you look downhill behind my house. It's not a flagpole, but the thing looks like it's 250 feet in the sky because it's right behind my house. And I can guarantee you this, that if a potential buyer comes to my house, the first impression of my house is going to be, what the hell is that behind your house? That's going to impact the value of my house. If I'm lucky enough to have that potential buyer drive down to my driveway, go into my house, sit down and discuss buying my home, you can rest assured my negotiation ability is going down because that cell tower is going to come up for discussion. There's no question about that. That's one analogy. The second analogy is, if I go to the top of that hill and I see that cell tower, I make a U-turn. So maybe I do sell my house. And even if I get the price that I put it up for, maybe it would have took me 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. It may take me 6 months, 9 months, 10 months to sell the house. That means I lose 6, 7, 8 months of mortgage payments. This is a real bad situation. I went into some of these homes on Eleanor Drive. The homeowners invited me in. Carl Deans, I hope you don't mind me mentioning his name. This guy's got a bow window, and he put it right there. Because we look out towards Connecticut by the airport, which is 20-something miles. We have nothing but beautiful skies and mountains. We watch the sun come up. You can close your eyes and you can look at that vision, and it's the most beautiful vision in the world. It's like waking up on a beach somewhere in Florida, Bermuda, or somewhere, when you love the sunset. It's not a beach, but it's the same atmosphere. You have the clouds sitting in the valley in the morning. You got the mist. You got the sun coming up over Connecticut. And then I went up there, and it saddened me so much, because I take a lot of pictures. It saddened me so much to know that here you're going to put a cell tower right in the middle of not just mine, but everybody's beautiful view. So a visually aesthetic negative impact, absolutely. When you come to buy, Carl, I hate to keep mentioning your names, but yours is the best. Carl Thiem's home, and he sits you in his living room, and he gets you a glass of wine, and he's selling his house, and he points out that window, and you see the sun, and you see the mountains, and you see the sky. It's so beautiful. But now when he sits him down, and the cell tower's sitting there, he's gonna have to pull his shade down, because he's gonna lose money. It's gonna definitely have an adverse impact. So I do want you to know that this is gonna hurt the value of our homes, no question. I'm asking you not to allow the Homeland Towers attorneys and representatives to come up here and use their bully tactics. They talk about telecommunications, 1996. You can't do that. You can do this. That woman's not allowed to submit an application about the historical nature of something on her property. You can't do that. Who are they to tell you what you can and can't do? Prove some documentation. Don't come up here and just tell us what we can and cannot do. You got to be careful. You got a lot of bully mentality going on here, and it's a scary proposition. I'll be done in just 2 or 3 minutes here, if you don't mind. I'm going to send this not only to the town board. I'm going to ask the planning board professionals, to include the attorneys, the planners, the engineers, the building inspectors, and any other consultants you may have. We know it's much easier for all of you to say the following: let's just pass this damn resolution and get it out of our way. Let's move on. Let's just bite the bullet and not fight this. Now, I'm not saying you would. I'm saying it's easy. I said it's easier. No. I said it's easier.
don't put words in
No,
our mouth.
okay. I'm not putting words. I'm just saying it's easier.
That's a wrong assumption.
Okay, wrong assumption,
Just
okay?
stick to your facts. That's
Okay,
what we're here for.
so the facts are, I'll skip that, I recall that, thank you. But it's harder to fight a fight sometimes, and I'm asking you to do the following thing. I'm asking you to make sure the most important people in this, we know it's easy, I'm gonna skip that because you asked me to skip that. I'm asking you to hold the feet to the fire then. Follow the letter of the law, follow the town code, look up what our attorney told you. Please value the impact letters that you got. Please review the pictures. And excuse me for saying it's easier to do. I didn't mean to insult it or imply that, but thank you for stopping me on that one. The most important people in this room tonight, besides the planning board members, obviously are residents in this room right here. Unfortunately, Homeland Towers, I look at them as invading our community. They want to invade our residential community with cell towers. And if you allowed this flawed application with misinformation and half-truths to move forward, you are doing irreparable harm to the residents of the town. Now, I know you're going to do your due diligence, so I'm not saying you're going to do that. I'm just asking you to be really careful. We'll end up with cell towers in every residential community in this town. And I ask you respectfully to deny this application, not on emotion, but on the facts of the law, the town code, the legitimate concerns of the residents in your town who have clearly presented the adverse effects of the proposed cell tower. Thank you respectfully.
Hi, my name is Emily Borelli. This is my husband, Michael Bacardi. I unfortunately only have 2 copies of a letter which I did not have a chance to submit to you guys. I'm going to give you guys the copies of the pictures so you guys can look at them. Again, I apologize as I only had 2 copies. Maybe you guys can look at the pictures as I get to them. I'm just going to read you my letter. I've been up here multiple times speaking. We live at 250 Croton Falls Road. This is our official letter of opposition to the proposed cell tower to be located on my neighbor's property within feet from my property line. We're coming up on our 3-year anniversary of living in our forever home. When we first viewed our now current home, we immediately fell in love with the aesthetic beauty of the property and the feel of the home. The feel of a home is something that can never be replaced or reproduced. The old farmhouse charm with the wraparound porch. Our house was originally built in 1774, pre-America. Pre-America, that's the truth. We had a sprawling backyard and pool, perfect for raising a family. House is enclosed by windows. It's gorgeous. You could see the entire side of my house is windows. I love summer lightning storms. Perfect for looking at everything. And the privacy. It's surrounded by trees. I like the secluded feel. Like I was secluded from the outside world entirely. Now it's disappointing to think that I was only able to enjoy the beauty of this house for 1.5 years of living there before our excitement in raising a family was ripped away. But what's even more disappointing is that we'll never be able to enjoy this property ever again. Once a 140, or dare I say, 160-foot tower is placed feet from our property line. In the pictures attached, if you look closely, there's a balloon floating in the air, right above the tree line. The balloon is from the test in which the cell phone tower that our neighbors, the Deals, who conveniently sold us the house, and who have conveniently never showed their face at a single meeting, or has kind of shied away from the public sphere now that they know how everyone feels, since they're trying to install us on their property. We were initially optimistic that all parties involved would come to their senses and the clearly adverse effects of this greatly would outweigh the relatively small monetary compensation generated from the installation of this tower. Unfortunately, as that balloon floated higher and higher into the sky that morning, we came to the unfortunate realization that's not the case. Once this cell tower is approved, we will no longer have the very factor for which we decided to purchase our house. Instead of seeing a beautiful, historic farmhouse with a wraparound porch, you'll pull into our driveway and see a cell tower. The first picture is when you're standing on my front porch and walking to the front house, what you will see. There'll be a cell tower. Instead of standing on our deck, looking outside and seeing children playing ball in the backyard or swimming in the pool, I'll see a cell tower. Instead of looking out the window of my bedroom, my living room, my kitchen, and my dining room, I will see a cell tower in every single window. Instead of the endless trees that we all love turn that magical color in the fall, I'll see a cell tower. The tower will be visible in almost every single room and at every vantage point of our house. It will destroy the essence of this home. A home that was originally constructed again in 1774. All based off of information that our attorney greatly provided has not been deemed, in my opinion, substantial. What's most frustrating about this case is that there are a number of alternatives that have not been explored as required by law. You guys are here to uphold the law and to protect and represent the town of Carmel as the taxpayers. Now, not only will also the cell tower destroy the essence of our home, but we also all know that our taxes aren't going to go down from this. So they're going to continue rising, even though my home is essentially destroyed. The major and singular motivation in this case seems to be monetary, and it's not okay anymore. We're not sure what this will do to help our cause or our future family's cause, if it does anything at all. The grim reality seems to be that this is inevitable. In full disclosure, we understand that in the increasingly wireless world, these towers and other systems are a necessary evil. But we ask in earnest, at what cost? There are more viable public places to put these things that must be explored. Maintenance. We are the only individuals here that will be directly impacted by approval of this cell tower application because we share an easement with the Deals. This easement will be used by Homeland Towers to access the Deals property, as well as install and maintain the cell tower. However, we are the only individuals that maintain this easement. The Deals do not contribute to maintain the upkeep, and currently, the easement is riddled with potholes, as you can see in the attached photos. In fact, one photo I took about 4 hours ago. These potholes have been repeatedly filled, then they continually worsen due to the Deals' illegal actions. The Deals installed, then removed site-mandated drainage that was required to be put in when they were first given approval by the planning and zoning boards to construct their home. Retirement home. Now, with every rainstorm, the water runs off their property, slowly and continuously damaging the easement, and this is all before Homeland decides to rip it all up to install their electrical and then do nothing about it. Now, I have some major factual issues concerning comments made by Attorney Gaudioso. To the taxpayers, myself, and the boards that need clarification for public record, on separate occasions, Homeland Towers, through their attorney, have lied during the course of this application. I myself am an attorney. This letter is not an attorney letter. This is a personal letter. Maybe it's because I'm a younger attorney and I still relatively remember the oath I took. But never have I ever lied in the course of representing a client in order to get something for my client. Never have I ever done that. During the balloon test, a Homeland Towers representative informed my father, Michael Borelli, and David Fafaro that they intended to pave the easement and fix the drainage issue. Again, on July 31st, 2019, before this last planning board meeting, myself, Attorney Gaudioso, and that gentleman in the corner sat on those 3 chairs right there, right before you guys, actually. You may have even heard some of our conversation, which he shook my hand, very nice, tried to make conversation, and said he was planning on paving it. He wanted to do the right thing, and I said that was my main concern. I don't think we have the law behind our backs, that as long as you try to do the right thing and maintain the property and fix the issues that you guys are going to create, maybe there can be some sort of agreement here. However, that's not the case. On August 22nd, 2019, at the last zoning board meeting, the attorney emphasized that Homeland Towers did not intend to pave the easement and that they had not told me that. Straight up lied directly to the zoning board. In fact, after I got up, the attorney jumped up awfully quickly to rebut everything that I had said, similarly to what he just did just now. The attorney continues to, let me be clear, not misstate. He is lying. He told me one thing to my face and another thing to your face and to the zoning board's face. Now, not only has he lied, but I don't know how he could lie when he's already addressed the very issue of the easement being riddled with potholes and the drainage issue. In fact, he had to respond to them in your very comments in which you guys provided, dated July 12th, 2019, specifically comments 10 and 11, in which the attorney acknowledged there was runoff in certain conditions. However, he seemed to feel that in front of the zoning board that that was not true. There is a clear pattern of this attorney making false statements to further Homeland Towers' agenda, at whatever cost to the taxpayers of the town of Carmel. This is not okay. If you find that this cell tower application has satisfied all legal requirements and that there are no alternative sites available and that you guys have completely done your due diligence and you feel at the bottom of your hearts that you guys are making the right decisions and you approve this, the very least that they should be required to do is maintain the roadway access to the cell tower and repair the damage that they will be doing in creating this. Now, I respectfully would like to remind both you guys and the zoning board, once Homeland Towers, as it's already been discussed multiple times, is granted this one variance or whatever permit approval for the 140-foot tower, they don't have to come back here again. Our attorney has made it clear, it's not gonna be a 140-foot tower. It's going to be a 160-foot tower, which will make everything a lot worse than what I already told you. And if you guys take the time to look through those pictures, you'll see the massive potholes taken throughout the entire easement, in which the attorney here has claimed do not exist, as well as the blatant and flagrant lies that he has told to both of you in the zoning board. We formally request that you guys would deny this application, or at the very least, make sure that everything is done according to law, the town code, and that you are doing it as you guys are required to do in order of protecting, looking out of the best interest of the town of Carmel taxpayers.
Please state your name.
My name is Jennifer Simon. I live at 2 Weber Hill Road. Emily Briley is my neighbor, and all my other neighbors in the surrounding property are here as well. My property directly abuts the property proposed for this tower on Croton Falls Road. I submitted my letter through our lawyer, which details the aesthetic impact on our property, so I'll be brief. I won't go into detail about my letter, as you have a copy of it. But briefly, we moved here 5 years ago and had never even heard of this town before. We found our dream home here online, and the beautiful views were the thing that drew us here from many miles away. I worked in corporate compliance and fought in courtrooms. I'm very familiar with the approach Homeland is taking in regard to the height of this tower. It's commonly referred to in the industry as an accommodation clause, where you propose more than you really want so you can appear accommodating later on and use that as leverage. From the moment this tower was proposed, and in fact, in the very first meeting that our community and our neighbors had together to discuss this, I let them know that this was probably the approach they would take, and that ultimately they would amend their application and make the tower 20 to 40 feet lower, even though ultimately they knew they'd get close to that 180 feet without anyone's permission. In addition, I've been a Verizon customer for 5 years here in this town on that property. I work from home and we have a smart home. As such, we have on average 15 devices running at any one time in our home. I have never once experienced an issue with my signal, dropped calls, or internet service. Not one time. In fact, I recently spoke to a Verizon representative, and she was wildly impressed at the number of devices we could run at one time without entirely draining our service. Lastly, on a personal note, as someone who was raised in poverty, that worked extremely hard for many years to put myself through school, to reach a level of success and purchase my dream home in a perfect setting, a dream that increasingly is rarely obtained by many Americans, I'm begging you to consider the overwhelming evidence that our lawyer has presented here today and that is present in many of the letters you've received. And don't let them ruin the aesthetic and bucolic environment we've built in this town, and that is ultimately the defining hallmark of Mahopac. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bryce Fierro. I just want to thank the board and everybody for allowing me the opportunity to speak. It's been a little bit difficult, sitting on the other side here for almost a year, not being able to speak about this. First of all, I'd just like to, take a step back and just kind of bring up, I was brought up in Mahopac. I was born in 1974, and my mother and father, who are both here, came to Mahopac with the idea of a lot of people that are in this room to, bring up a family in this small town, in this residential community that we live in, and to be on the countryside in a serene community that's only 50 miles from New York City. Needless to say, it's been wonderful for me to grow up here, being around nature, around this family-oriented community. What I also noticed here over the years is there's a lot of small family businesses that thrive. Big business isn't a popular thing here in Mahopac. I guess you just call it a small town. So when I see a company like Homeland come into our town, and, you know, frankly, I think Mr. Gaudioso and his entourage should be ashamed of themselves coming into this courtroom and laughing as our concerns are being brought up and represented by our lawyer. I served in the United States Marine Corps, and when I returned from home, I decided I wanted to hang my hat in the town that I grew up in Mayapack. So that led me to purchase, some property with my father. And that's going to lead to my first question. I'd like to ask everyone in this room, how many people really believe that putting a cell phone on your property is going to increase the value? I don't think anybody believes that here. But Mr. Gaudioso and Homeland have told us that our property values will increase. The other question I have is, the property that we reside on has been deemed historical, at least it's being considered. And as Mrs. Borelli had mentioned, that her house was built before this was even a country, before we were in the United States. So why wasn't that found by Mr. Gaudioso? Why did they ignore that? It seems to me that they're not being honest. And, I just don't appreciate, I'm a person that likes integrity, and I just don't appreciate a lawyer coming up here and, not doing the right thing. After 45 years in this town, I find it quite disappointing that the town would even consider this cell tower application. The town of Carmel has strict laws regarding cell phone towers, and they must be upheld. Placing a cell phone tower next to my home and property is not lawful. First of all, one thing I would like to mention is the proposed property has been granted a variance for not having the proper frontage. It's not lawful to grant a second variance, which is going to make this already non-conforming lot more non-conforming. Our lawyer, which thank you, sir, has outlined a number of reasons to deny this application. Homeland Towers has not been honest with the community, and they should be ashamed of their unethical practices. I follow the town meetings frequently, and I also watch what Taco Bell has been, told to do. They've been asked to change the roof line. They've been told that they want the building basically to look like our community. They want to keep it so it looks like the it kind of fits in. And I just would ask the board if they can do their due diligence also with this application. I'm not saying you're not, but let's make Homeland step up to the plate and give us some solid evidence, not just a drop call list that doesn't really prove anything. One last thing I would like to say is allowing a special exception for a use permit for a wireless telecommunications at 254 will increase the already existing nonconformity of this property, of this parcel. A variance was already granted by this board for construction of a single-family residence on this parcel on 8/27/15. This is a landlocked piece of property with multiple easements for access. The variance granted was to alleviate the 100-foot frontage on a town, country, or state road requirement. Additionally, the variance was granted based on the statement that no further subdivision was planned. Granting a special exception use permit for this address would be a violation of this section. I respectfully ask the board to reconsider and, do their due diligence and represent us and deny this application. I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
My name is Gail Fierro, and I live at 308 Croton Falls Road. I'm going to make this as brief as possible, but my thing here is the historic part, 292 to 294, and the well house, as it's being considered for listing. It's official, and this is on the website, their CRIS website. The two pieces, that means it's officially being considered, which I'll read this law that Mr. Krattinger wrote. I'll read it again because at the last meeting, Mr. Gaudioso tried to downplay this rule, this law. He tried, I know, you know, because I gave you all the letters. The law is the State Historic Preservation Act of 1980, and Section 106 of the National Historic Reservation Act of 1966 states there is no distinction between a determination of eligibility and the actual listing on the registers. And Mr. Krattinger further told me, as such, the eligibility of the Yates-related resources should be taken into consideration relative to any action that triggers these historic preservation laws. At the last zoning board meeting, when I said this, Mr. Gaudioso couldn't wait to get up and really say that this, he only heard about this last month, which is not true because I started this November 11th in 2018. And he did not do his due diligence because I have the FCC reports, I have everything that I've read, and his client, Richard Deal, knew about all the historic sites that are there. It used to be the Mahopac Playhouse. It's in all the records of town and county. Yet, and the FCC report and every report that they submitted where it said about, is it in contiguous, is it anywhere near a historic property that not only listed but even considered, everyone's no, 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 no. But in the FCC report, Homeland did write specific letters to the Native American community and to see if they wanted to come forward and express any concerns because it's so close to all the historic. We were never given that opportunity to come forward. My family would have definitely come forward, but Richard Deal knew all these years that that was the site of the playhouse, the Mahopac Playhouse. Albany Miller, Bruin, her husband at the time was Lawrence Bruin. It's all in the records. So they did not do due diligence where the whole town knew. Richard Deal knew. He should have said to them, yes, this should be marked yes. And it should have been looked into, and it wasn't, because my family would have come to that meeting and expressed our disbelief in all of this. So he's not telling the truth about things. They were hoping it would all get swept under the rug and nobody would be maybe smart enough to delve into this. Well, I'm in this to the end, and it's very similar to the Agor case, and I think he worked on that too. They're not listed, but they are considered for listing. And I'm in constant touch with Mr. Krattinger, and he has to do all his applications over. I have copies to give you just of some of them from FCC. It needs to be, if we're not going to, first of all, it should be no residential areas. But if he wants to keep considering, he's got to start from square one and redo these applications because they weren't done fairly and honestly. And it's got to be corrected. I think I'm pretty well finished. These are copies of some of the applications that he needs, FCC and stuff. I have all copies. I just want to make sure that there's nothing else, but I'm making this. You know, it was Richard Yates who wrote Revolutionary Road. He lived on number 294 house. I have all these pictures of him at the house, at the well house, writing the book. And he just, Mr. Gaudioso wanted to emphasize that it's not listed. He was just saying so that everyday people who aren't familiar with historical things, they'll say, oh, you know, maybe he knows. He doesn't know what he's saying with this. He's wrong, and I just want to put it on record because that's what he said. He needed that on record. So, and I have copies of the Yates history, if I could give it all to you, just so you know how, and that's all I have. And
Thank
one last thing, and Emily Borelli, I'm glad she mentioned that with the historical, the house she's living in, and that's even proves it more that Richard Neal knew all about that place. He went to the homeowner, who was Jill Miller. He knew all about it. So that's all. Thank you.
Anyone else from the public like to be heard tonight? Go ahead.
Hi, I'll make it quick. My name is Stephen Rowe. I live on Dixon Road. This is actually going to be in my backyard. If I look out my window, it'll be right there. I hadn't planned on saying anything tonight, but I wanted to just speak because hearing my community has been kind of disturbing, how similar a lot of our stories are. I moved into the house 2 years ago at the end of October. Same thing. It was the house we always wanted. We fell in love with it. I lived in Hell's Kitchen for about 10 years. I moved to Carmel because it's like nothing I've ever seen before. In Hell's Kitchen, you don't make eye contact with your neighbors. You avoid them. You don't like anyone. That's just how you do it. Since I've moved here, my neighbors have welcomed me into their home. They've invited me over. We've had Christmas cards. The night my son was born, just a couple of days, in June, a couple of days after my wife and I were in the hospital, I got a call from one of my neighbors who found my dog who got out. This is a beautiful community with beautiful people. And this has been so upsetting to see this happen. And I can't help but feel that it's just because of money. The homeowners aren't putting this on their land because they love giant towers. Homeland isn't putting it here because they really love building stuff. I don't have the cash to fight this the way I should or could, but there has to be a better way. That this community, I couldn't do this. I would never put this on my property. I wouldn't want to do anything that would bring out my neighbors like this. I couldn't do that to them. It's been a long night. I won't keep any more of your time. I owe it to my son. I owe it to my community. So when he is old enough, he's 3 months right now, you might have heard him, he's cooing outside, is when he says, "Dad, what's that?" And I say, "Well, that's a monument to cash, son." I just had to say that. I left Hell's Kitchen for Carmel, and I'm never going back because of these people and because of the trees, not the fake weird tree they're going to try and put in my backyard. Finally, the way this is going to be, they're going to build a road that's behind a hill. So at any point, if anyone wants to go up that road, you can look into my bedroom window. At any time, you can drive up on that road to access this. There are trees that are really tall that might block some of my view of this, but I've seen what Homeland's done. I've followed this. They said when the balloon tests were going to be. Weirdly, it was a few days before that, the day of my son's baby shower before he was born. And I think that's because they didn't want the photos taken. They have no respect for the community. They have no respect for the homeowners, let alone those around it. I can't shake the feeling that one of those trees is going to get knocked down or something because Homeland doesn't respect my property, and I don't think they respect this community either. So I just wanted to say that. I owe it to my neighbors to say that. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to, yeah, that's fine.
No, we're still on Croton Falls Road. I stepped to the men's room, sorry. This is still Croton Falls Road. Any other comments people want to be heard from the public on Croton Falls Road?
Just to let everyone know.
Yeah,
Can you come to the mic?
My apologies for my appearance. I just came from Little League practice. But on August 23rd, I moved into 334 Croton Falls Road.
I'm sorry, your name, sir?
My name is Paul Cotter, sir. I border the Fierros as well as 310. And, you know, I just want to say one thing. Being here since August 23rd, I lived in Lake Cassidy for 6 years prior. Being over there, I'm pretty set back with about a 250-foot driveway. And one thing I can definitely say is I have absolutely no cell phone issues at all, wireless issues. We have perfect service. So with that being said, please take that into consideration. We have no issues at all back there. Thank you.
If there's no one else on Croton Falls Road, Mr. Guardioso, you do have a chance to speak.
Thank you. I would just like to correct some factual inaccuracies. Starting with the attorney for the residents, I think there was a comment that the crane test was at 140 feet. That's incorrect. The crane test was actually 180 feet.
At what location?
At the Lake Cassie property. In addition to that, in addition to the crane test, we also performed 6 balloon tests. Notice was provided for all the balloon tests. We didn't receive one request by anyone to take any additional photographs.
I'm sorry, can everyone hear him? Can you just talk
Sure.
a little
We did not receive one request at all to take any additional photographs. Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to be able to talk to the board.
Speak loud enough so everyone can hear.
Sure. So let me reiterate. The crane test was done at 180 feet, not 140 feet. In addition to that, we did 6 balloon tests. Every balloon test was publicly noticed. In addition to that, we also provided viewpoint locations to be reviewed by the board and staff added additional viewpoints. We took photographs from every single viewpoint that was requested by the town and by staff, and we received no other requests to take any other viewpoints. As for the height, there was a question about what the criteria is for the height. In fact, the issue of height is an issue before the Zoning Board of Appeals, and that's an application that's pending. Regarding the real estate value report that we submitted, that report simply provides the data. The data is 15 studies over 5 years from an MAI certified appraiser. The data shows what the data shows. And in fact, the appraiser confirmed that the data showed there was no diminution in property values for properties with or without a view of towers over 15 different studies, including studies within the town of Carmel. I believe the attorney had indicated he hadn't read the report, but he assumed there were no towers in Carmel. In fact, that was incorrect. In comparison, the broker letters have absolutely no data whatsoever. Many different courts, and we'll provide the case law on this, have reviewed an identical methodology as contained in the Lane Appraisals report and upheld the Lane Appraisals report in the face of broker letters, including a case that Mr. Campanelli represented the residents on, and it ultimately went to litigation, and the applicant, Homeland Towers, prevailed.
Was that Phillips Town, Mr. Guardioso?
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll keep my comments directed to the board.
You got it.
Sorry.
But it was actually in the town of Kent. What I would suggest, what I would encourage, is if the board intends to have a third-party appraiser review the Lane Appraisals report, you also have that appraiser opine on the relevance of the broker letters, particularly after we provide the relevant case law. With respect to the Sprint case in Ossining, the citation is actually Sprint v. Ossining. That case had nothing to do with a municipal board reviewing a zoning application. That was actually a private lease case, and that is the citation Sprint v. Ossining. I know that because we handled that case. There was also another incorrect comment that Homeland Towers was the only applicant and it doesn't provide personal wireless services. That's incorrect. Verizon Wireless is also a co-applicant on this application, and they do provide personal wireless services. There was also a statement that no data was provided. Again, that's incorrect. The applicant has provided both propagation maps, drive test maps at multiple heights, 180 feet, 160 feet, and 140 feet, as well as KPI data, key performance indicator data. That data includes both access failure rates and drop call rates. That data was reviewed and confirmed by your own consultant, Mr. Grafe, who happens to be a New York State licensed professional engineer. Mr. Grafe confirmed there was no capacity issue. In fact, he confirmed this was a coverage gap issue. There was a statement that the applicant has to prove there's a significant gap in coverage. That's incorrect. That's not required under your code. Only if this board denied the application would then the applicant have to show whether there was a prohibition of service to the federal court. Recently, the FCC issued an order and elaborated on the fact that the significant gap test is not the correct test. It's actually a materially inhibit test. In any event, we believe we clearly showed there was a significant gap in coverage. But the whole explanation of how a court process would go is completely inaccurate. Now, I don't feel comfortable talking about litigation because we're not in litigation, but I do want to explain and correct the misstatements about what type of case a federal litigation is. Federal litigation comes in two basic causes of action or claims. One claim is, does the board have substantial evidence to deny the application? If the board does have substantial evidence to deny the application based on the written record, then the court, de novo, or meaning that the court looks at new evidence, including expert reports, depositions, and other factual evidence that's submitted, and the court determines whether there's been a prohibition of service. So the explanation of how a federal court claim is handled in this type of context by the prior attorney was incorrect. Regarding the size of the gap, the documents have shown that 788 residents are within the gap area. And that's the, and I think we discussed this previously, that's the worst case scenario from Verizon's point of view. There's actually larger gaps at the higher frequency levels. And we've discussed that, your consultant opined on that, and we submitted that data. Regarding the setback, I know there was some discussion about setbacks and so forth and so on. We meet the setbacks of the town code. The property line setback is 25 feet. The closest property line in this case is 299 feet. We also meet the setback requirement to residences, which is 2 times the height of the tower. We're well beyond that. That's shown on the plans. I want to state very clearly and unequivocally, I have never had a conversation with Ms. Barilli in my life. She must be confused about who she was speaking to. I suspect she was speaking to one of my clients. My clients have indicated, which we've indicated all along, that we would be willing to pave the access drive. The problem is the access drive is within 84 feet of a wetland. And because of that, we do not believe that the DEC, the DEP, and the Conservation Board would allow that. In fact, we have an application in front of the Conservation Board now, and they accepted the application last month. They requested some additional details, and will continue to provide that. The existing access drive is the existing access drive. To the extent it's damaged, that's obviously not something that was caused by Homeland Towers. To the extent that Homeland Towers does cause any disturbance to the access drive, we would be responsible for repairing that disturbance. We have no problem with the condition of approval on that ground. But if there are existing potholes, those are obviously existing potholes. Nevertheless, when the utilities are placed in, we'll make sure the access drive is level and safe, and we'll make sure that we repair any damage that we cause to that access drive. As far as the statement that there's not allowed to be a second variance on the property and somehow that would increase some type of nonconformity, quite frankly, that is not the law and that is not correct. I'd like to talk a little bit about the historic preservation issue, and we'll document this from our consultant, EBI. Now, EBI is the consulting company that specializes in this. In fact, the lead consultant from EBI has the proper qualifications according to the requirements under the Historic Preservation Act, and that's a Department of Interior qualification in this particular instance. They performed the Section 106, which is the federal law. They performed that process according to the federal programmatic agreement. They followed the process. They did all of the due diligence. That's in the 106 report that was submitted to SHPO. And over a year ago, SHPO concurred that there were no historic properties within the area of potential effects in accordance with the federal law. That was documented in the EAF from day one. That was attached to the EAF in this case. Apparently, after that document was submitted, the neighboring property owner or a property owner nearby commenced the process to have their property listed as eligible for listing on the state and federal register. We were never aware of that. In fact, I specifically requested copies of all letters that were submitted to the town, and I never did receive the letter indicating that they were undergoing that process. We were never notified of that. In any event, we became aware of that the property had become eligible for listing less than a month ago. That was the first time that we became aware of that. And we will put in a letter explaining why this facility under SECRA, and you as the SECRA agency, will make a determination under SECRA based on the evidence whether the facility will have a significant adverse effect on that property for the reasons why it was listed as eligible for listing on the National Register. Another incorrect statement was that Mr. Richard Deal is my client. Mr. Richard Deal is not my client. There's also been some references to the Agor case. If you're not familiar with what that was, the county had proposed entering into a lease with Homeland Towers. There was a nearby property that was eligible for listing on the Historic Register. Because of that process, the lease never went forward. Has absolutely nothing to do with this particular matter. Finally, there was a statement that the balloons were floated on days before they were noticed. Again, that's entirely incorrect. The balloons were floated on the days they were noticed. The only deviation from that process at all was we floated additional balloons on days after they were noticed because there was a request from town staff that there was a day that was too foggy. That was the only instance where the balloon wasn't floated on the day that it was noticed. But at all times, there was no balloon floated days prior to be able to take photographs or not allow people to take photographs. That's just simply untrue. So I wanted to correct those statements. I wanted to make that clear. I find it insulting when people say that I've lied when in fact their statements are just incorrect. Thank you.
So, thank you. So let me tell you what I'd like to do at this point. We can go back and forth for hours, and that's how it is, that's how it is. I'd like to leave the public hearing open. And I want to leave it open. I need time to digest all this information. I think I received about this much data yesterday afternoon. And I'd like to ask Homeland Security to extend the shot clock until the end of October so that we have time to digest everything we heard tonight and do our due diligence.
Sure. So would this application be back on for October 9th? Would that be the understanding?
Probably before that. I didn't look at the calendar yet, so.
The next available agenda.
And what's that date?
2 weeks.
2 weeks, every 2 weeks.
And if it's not but we need to extend the shot clock. We need time to do our due diligence. You likewise?
I think the limiting factor, and I just want to check the calendar, I think the limiting factor is I think you had indicated that there is a request from the third-party appraiser?
Correct.
So will they be ready in 2 weeks?
We hope so. We can't commit to that, no.
Sure.
We're shooting to have that information provided as soon as possible.
Sure. So as long as we're on the agenda for the 25th and/or the 9th, we'd be happy to extend the shot clock to the end of
And we'll
October.
decide that based on people being ready.
Right.
Sure.
Right?
Both the applicant and our consultants.
And the shot clock would be extended to the end of October?
Correct.
Okay. And this way, with the public hearing left open, you still have plenty of time to speak. I don't want to close it. I think there's a lot of good information still coming out. I think it's the right thing to do. All right, this is all on Croton Falls Road.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
the only other thing I would just say, it's Homeland Towers, not Homeland Security. And I would just
Yes,
suggest
It's getting late.
that possibly the board, if you are going to adjourn the public hearing, just adjourn it to that date certain on September 25th. And if it's not ready at that night, you could adjourn it again to October 9th, just so that everyone has fair and adequate notice that that's the date.
That's fine.
Thank you.
So with that, we'll move on to
Dixon.
the Dixon Road, Homeland Towers, Dixon Road, 36. Mark, welcome to your first night. I hope you come back in 2 weeks. Mike, comments on 36 Dixon Road, Homeland Towers?
Same comment, they're in front of the zoning board of appeals for the height, the driveway width, and one more thing, fence height.
Fence height.
So I have no comments at this time.
Pat?
No further comments on this one.
Rich?
Same comments as last time. It's a, proposed tower exceeding maximum height, 50 feet, which is now an 110-foot tall tower. Requirements set forth in 15662 have not been provided. It's a priority site 5. The applicant must provide an explanation as why a higher priority site wasn't selected. It's located on the property adjacent to McDonough Park off Angela Drive. As such, per section 156L, the applicant must demonstrate that the proposed tower will not unreasonably interfere with the view from the town park. They have acknowledged the fact that they will need to develop and submit a stormwater pollution prevention plan due to the area of disturbance, which is 26,850 square feet.
Thank you. Mr. Guardioso?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I assume that the same comment applies to the other case regarding the appraisal. I know there's been some comments about the location of the facility on the property line. What we do have and what we've looked into based on some of the prior comments is actually relocating the facility on the property to the actual opposite end of the property, to the other property line. And if I may just hand up, these are just some preliminary sketches.
There was some discussion of proximity.
Craig, I've got one. One more. Thanks.
Oh, no, is that, no, this- here, let me copy for you. Bullshit. Bullshit.
So, as we discussed last month, there was, it may have been at the zoning board meeting, but there was a question why we were not in the town park. We actually were not given permission by the town board to enter the town park with a lease. We'll document that as well. We'll also provide full-size drawings similar to this for the next meeting, but essentially I wanted to show you this. Basically, we're able to relocate the facility to the opposite end of the property. I think that does a couple things. It brings it further from the residences. It also eliminates the access drive and some of the concerns that there were to stormwater and erosion control by being able to locate it where the alternative location is.
You are going to submit the plan, so that we'll have to go back through the review that we did initially, just to make sure that they meet town code on those site plan issues.
So I
just
think,
so you're
yeah.
aware.
Yeah, so what I would say is that we don't intend to submit a full set of plans at this stage. If the planning board, after reviewing the plans and having the time to review it, requests or prefers the alternative location, we'd be happy to engineer it in that location.
So this is a 10-acre parcel, correct, or 10-acre approximately?
10.19.
So is there a way to put it more, I don't know if there's wetlands, I don't know if there's a lake, but more in the middle, so it doesn't have much of an impact on any neighboring residents?
No, because there were other uses there. There's also wetlands towards the back of the property. By pushing this, what we've done here is we've pushed this the furthest from residences as possible by placing it up against the property line adjacent to the park. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So by moving it in that direction, we've moved it as far as we can from Brittany.
Is it the wetland at the back of the property, east end of the property, is that a state wetland or just a town wetland?
I believe it's a state, but I'll have to double check that.
I think it is.
And what we will do too as well with the next submission, we actually had the DEC give us the signed survey showing where the wetlands are, and we'll provide that to the board as well.
Well, refresh my memory, what was the reason it was moved from the location where it was proposed to this new location?
So the resident comments were that it was too close to the property line, and it was too close to the house, that now it'll be approximately 706 feet from that residence, whereas before, it was right on the property, it met the 25-foot setback, it was approximately 30 feet from the property line. So the comment was, not only was the tower too close to the property line, but what we did is we came up the existing access drive, and then we went down an existing path and created an actual access drive, and there was concern about tree removal and erosion and sediment control. We don't believe those concerns were a problem because we had addressed those in the engineering documents, but nevertheless, given those concerns from the residents, we were able to place the facility all the way on the opposite end of the property.
And those concerns were voiced during the prior meeting.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Those were voiced during the prior.
The prior meeting and during the zoning board meeting.
The picture you just gave us kind of shows the new cell tower on top of something that appears to be existing there. What is that?
There's basically there's like a shed in that area. There are a number of outbuildings on that property.
Isn't that the paddock? No. That's not the paddock? Okay.
No, I don't believe so. You're talking about the building? Okay. When you say the paddock, do you mean the enclosure or the building?
Enclosure for horses.
Gotcha, yes.
I'm just looking at Google Earth to see where I am.
So again, I'm not expecting a decision from the board this evening. Obviously, we're just presenting this to you. But what we will do is we'll provide the full-size plans. They won't be fully engineered, but give you the opportunity to take a look at it. If the board prefers the alternative location, we'd be happy to engineer it. The engineering will not change much because, we're using the existing access drive and the existing access almost all the way up to that location. Thank you. Any other questions on that?
I'm sorry, is this drawing in large print on one of those boards?
No, but we'll submit a large print to you.
Okay, well, if the meeting is open, right? Right. For discussion, they can't comment because they can't see this. I'm sorry. If the public meeting is still open, and if you've submitted some new information in this small format, the public can't see it, but if we can get that next.
We have it on the board here, but in that size.
Okay, so I don't think it's particularly helpful for the
Right,
comment,
we're
but
gonna leave it
it's going to be
open,
open,
yeah,
so.
The people that it's going to affect their property, we would like to see it.
And
It's
we'll,
not just
and we will provide that. They will provide
Yeah,
that.
We're going to keep the public meeting open, so.
Yeah, again, this was.
They'll submit full-size documents.
This was in large part in response to comments that, quite frankly, we received yesterday.
Right.
Right.
I have a question on site plan LE2. On the compound plan is showing three locations for future equipment.
I'm sorry, are you referring to the original or the new one we just gave you?
The new one
Okay.
the new one that was just handed out this evening.
Thank you.
Site plan LE2. I see several areas that show future equipment. What's the intent of that? What would be future equipment?
Sure, so we've always shown that. In fact, under your code, we're required to build the facility for future co-location. We submitted a co-location commitment letter as well, as required by your code. So what we do is not only do we build the tower to be able to support co-location, we also make sure that we have the space at the ground. The entire compound is designed for it. So basically, there are 4 operating companies in the area right now. There's 2 that might potentially merge. There's also the potential of Dish Network providing a wireless infrastructure. Our experience has basically been 4 carriers in total. So we've designed it for 4 carriers, plus we've also designed space in the event the municipality should need space for its own antennas. Homeland Towers has offered to make that space available at no charge to the town, both on the tower and within the compound. I just also want to correct another misstatement. This issue of that we could just automatically put on a 20-foot extension or more, that's simply not correct. There are 6 criteria under the federal law that allows a facility to be modified in a way that does not substantially change the physical dimensions. One of those criteria, in fact, is whether it defeats the stealth elements of the facility. And courts have held that if you change the height or the width of a stealth facility in such a way to defeat the stealth elements, that's not considered an eligible facilities request. So the scare tactics of that, if we get in this case, a 110-foot tower, it'll be extended in height automatically without having to come to the town, that's just simply incorrect.
Just a question getting back again to the future equipment, those areas. I understand other carriers would come in with other cabinets and controls and so forth, but would they also be adding additional propane tanks and generators?
So it depends. It depends on what they use. So some carriers do and some carriers don't. Some carriers have and then they've not. Some carriers do it on certain sites and not on other sites, so it's a little bit difficult to predict. One of the things that we've done is we've laid out the equipment compound in a way that we think will support all of the equipment, including those possible additional uses as far as generators.
I just wanted to bring out that then there is a possibility of having 4 1,000-gallon propane tanks.
It's not been our experience. Our experience has been not that and some carriers prefer to have diesel, some carriers prefer to have propane. There are pros and cons of each. Sometimes it's actually good to have one carrier with diesel, one carrier with propane, because then there's a redundancy in the fuel supply. Usually when those types of facilities are needed, it's a real emergency situation. There's a power outage.
So how many fuel supply in maximum usage once? Sorry. Once you get 4 carriers, how many different fuel supplies are there?
It could be 3 different types that they generally use. They either use a propane generator, or they use a diesel generator.
So there's going to be a diesel storage tank for the
usually it's built into the generator, the ones that we've seen on these sites, or they have battery backup. So not every carrier uses a generator. Not every carrier uses a generator at every site.
I have a concern, bringing up a point that Mr. Campanella brought up about towers catching on fire. And now we're going to have a fuel source back there, and we're talking about a heavily wooded area. Has the fire department looked at this?
So
and
we did.
Access to the facility?
So we did refer this application and the other application to the fire department in both instances. We haven't received any negative response. As far as tower fires, quite frankly, those are extremely rare.
Quite frankly, they're what?
Rare, extremely rare.
Have
So I
you
think
experienced in any of your sites
No.
that you've put up?
none for Homeland Towers at all.
It's rare, but it has happened.
Just as buildings have caught on fire, and obviously we still permit buildings.
Well, my concern is because it's wooded. Both of these towers are going up in wooded areas with houses back there, and forest fires spread.
Yeah, actually.
So you're talking about trees around it.
Actually, the other application is up against woods, but it's in a very cleared area. The entire area is cleared, and it's been used in the past for machinery storage, and it's completely cleared now. This area is actually towards the park, but there are ball fields there, and there's lights, large poles with lights. So this isn't. I wouldn't consider this a heavily wooded area. There is woods in the area, but if you look on the original sheet, on the front sheet, you could see.
Can I ask everyone else to show some respect? Whoever's speaking, let's all be quiet. We can speed up the meeting and all get out at a reasonable hour.
You can see there's a strip of woods between this and the ball fields, and the ball fields is a very cleared area. The back area of the property has all of the different. I use the word paddock, but all the different horse stables back in there, and there's cleared areas around that. So it's not like it's stuck in the middle of the woods, and quite frankly, we do have facilities in the middle of the woods, and that's not a problem. There's also a house up there, so access to that home is available for the fire department, just as it would be for this facility.
Well, that's the thing. You just said it. We have a house up there.
2 houses.
And you have woods, and you say you put towers in wooded areas before, but are there houses in those areas?
Of course.
I don't want to put our residents at risk. That's my concern. If
Yeah,
there's a fire, are these towers equipped with any kind of extinguishing?
So the tower itself is made out of metal. The place where there have been fires on very rare occasions is where there was welding going on the tower, and the sheathing on the cables inside the tower caught on fire. That's when you have fire. Other than that, the tower itself is a non-combustible steel structure. So the issue of fire is completely remote. Access to the location is provided, because remember, we have to build the tower, we have to bring in a crane, we have to bring in cement trucks to be able to build the tower. So there's full access to each of these locations, both for construction and ongoing maintenance as well as emergency services. That's how we design the facilities.
I have a question. I'm sorry. So it's been, a couple of things have been stated here, and just for clarity, for the record, from my understanding, okay? You've indicated Homeland Towers and Verizon are co-applicant on this application. Okay. And as such, Verizon is a provider and contrary to another statement. I'm just trying to understand, there's also a coverage map that purportedly is Verizon's coverage indicates that there's not a coverage problem. Can you tell us, did Verizon come to Homeland Towers and say, we need coverage here because we don't have coverage? Or how did this come about that Homeland Towers has decided or indicated, or the partnership has decided that there needs to be a tower here? How did that come to be?
Sure. So take one step back. We'll provide a response to that online marketing coverage map and the relevance of that to the materials that have already been submitted. Secondly, Homeland Towers and Verizon work together, and they have a process where Verizon has an area of need, Homeland Towers finds the site and develops the site for Verizon. So it's a pretty straightforward process and not uncommon in the telecommunications industry.
Okay, so...
But also on top of that, just want to reiterate, Homeland Towers does not build towers on speculation. They and this is a great example, they come in with a wireless carrier as a co-applicant. They don't build towers on speculation without a carrier.
So...
Sure. And Mr. Vicente, who's the president of the company, would like to add a few words to that.
Sure.
So, sorry about that. So one thing that's really important is we don't make any determinations about the need or the location of where a tower should go. The need is established by Verizon. What they ask for as far as height, specifications, et cetera, all comes from the carrier. We do not build on spec, and we do not make any of those decisions. We simply are the developer once they've made those decisions.
And you're a local developer, national?
We are a regional developer.
Regional. So just to be clear then, so Verizon, in essence, you have a working relationship that you are their regional, one of their regional providers or builders of towers. They identified themselves that there is a need in this area. And they then, because you're the regional builder, they've come to you and said, hey, can you find us a location?
Correct.
Is that accurate?
That is accurate. We have a contract with them. When they have established a need in a particular area, they give us directive as to looking for a property in that area and the specifications they need. We then go out and secure it and develop it for them. But we do not make the decisions of where it goes, what height it is, what kind of equipment goes on there, you know, how it fits into their network. That is not anything that we are in charge of or do. We just basically, it's like an order that they give us.
Understood. So the follow-on question then is the determination, if I understood the information I've seen here, the determination of the coverage gap by Verizon, it was indicated to be based on a model. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. What Verizon does is they know their network, they know where their network is failing or flawed or has holes or problems. Based on that, they give us their order to go and find something to fix that. As far as all the information that's been provided, that information has been provided, as Mr. Gaudioso said, in multiple ways, including the best way, which Ron Grave actually considers the gold standard, and which Mr. Campanelli got wrong, which is called the drive test, which Mr. Campanelli described. That's what you should do. That's what we did do. We conducted a drive test, live antenna on the crane, drove around, collected all that data, put it together, gave it to your consultant. He reviewed it. So all that was done And none of it is done by Homeland. It's done by
Okay.
qualified vendors, Verizon, and reviewed by a third-party entity.
I understand that, thank you. So, okay, if I understood the drive test, because I had read some of Mr. Gray's report, that there were some variations in strength. I understand that that is a signal strength test?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there correlation between, because there's also mention of a dropped call analysis that Verizon has?
That's a different set of
Okay, so
analysis.
strength and dropped calls.
If you recall, the drop call data was requested by the planning board. We
Yes.
had indicated that, in this case, we thought it was somewhat anecdotal, but that we would provide it anyway. We did provide it. It was explained what the relevance was. Mr. Grafe had actually commented that it was of no relevance to him, but we had provided it anyway at the request of the board. But at the end of the day, this issue, as Mr. Grafe confirmed, and as PeerCon demonstrated, is a coverage gap issue. The drive test data showed the signal levels as collected at multiple heights from the crane test and as collected without the proposed site from the existing surrounding sites. We submitted both what we call a scan test, which is the existing signal from existing sites, and the drive test data, or the CW data, from this proposed location, from the crane with the test antenna at multiple heights.
Okay. Well, sorry, but just for clarity, okay. Who then is, who determines what the minimum signal strength requirement is to constitute a gap? Is that a federal code, like you must have X amount of strength?
It's a function of the service of the system. It's a function of the area and the design that you're trying to cover. So for example, the signal strength within a building has to be stronger in order to penetrate the building. But what we provided was the actual signal strength in the ambient air, not anyplace else. And then we propagated that on drive test maps. So that's a matter of what will the system operate at various signal levels, which then determines where that signal level will be strong enough. Let me give you an example. Have you ever had a call, walked into a building, gone into the basement, or gone into an elevator and lost the call? That happens because the elevator or the building itself, that degrades the signal. So the system's designed to take into account those variables. Also, there was a statement before that was incorrect, that the propagation model doesn't take into account the topography or the trees. Again, that's incorrect. So what we did is we did a propagation model, okay, which is based on the computer modeling program to show where coverage would be based on all the existing sites, and then we confirmed that with the actual drive test data. So we did actually both ends of that analysis.
Okay, I'm sorry, all due respect, I think I understood that, but I'm not sure it quite answered my question. The question is, what entity determines what is an adequate signal strength? In other words, you know, I don't know, analogy, a doctor determines how much a prescription you need based on some real data. That's
Sure.
the doctor
The
makes that
engineers
choice.
do.
Who, is
The
it
carrier
Verizon?
end.
Is it
No.
the Fed saying
No,
all providers must have X amount of power?
The carriers do, and they all have basically relatively the same criteria. So it's all based on physics, quite frankly.
Okay.
Based on the frequency
I don't wanna
range,
go
the
into
type of
physics of
frequency.
it, but, okay.
But yes, the carrier determines the
Okay.
criteria, the design
Thank you.
criteria.
Can you address the extent to which modeling was used in creating these or performing these tests?
Sure, we did both actually. So the propagation model is a model that's used, and it's detailed in the PeerCon report, the ATOL model. It's a well-regarded model that's used throughout the world. Basically, what the model takes into account is the physics, the signal propagation from the particular frequency ranges. It takes into account the clutter, which includes everything that's on the ground, the trees, the foliage, things of that nature. It takes into account the topography, and it uses a formula to be able to provide an area where the coverage is from the surrounding sites. And it's a prediction, but we know that the prediction is correct because we also then went out with a drive test vehicle with an antenna on the roof connected to special drive test equipment in the vehicle, and we collected the actual data, and then we were able to compare that to the modeling.
The modeling is helpful.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Have you provided us the raw drive test data?
Yes, we provided all of that data. We also were able to use the modeling because the modeling shows where the coverage is throughout, okay? The drive test data is limited to the roads that's driven. So that's one of the downfalls of the drive test is that you collect the data on the roads. But when you look at our drive test, and when Mr. Grafe looked at our drive test, we drove almost the entire area. It was very robust, the areas that we drove. And we provided that data on the maps, and Mr. Grafe did review that. So we did both, to answer your question.
And if I may, just to, I don't think that there, and I've been doing this for 30 years, and I can tell you, I don't think that there is any additional data that we could possibly provide. Because once you do the modeling, you do the drive testing, you do the call data, that's basically as much as information that exists. And as Mr. Grafe has mentioned often, this is the gold standard, and as Mr. Campanelli said, the drive test is really a great way to confirm the model. And in this case, we did everything we possibly could to demonstrate the need to both this board and your consultant. I don't think there's anything else we could have possibly done. And once again, all those decisions, height, does it work, where it goes, those are all made by the carrier, in this case, Verizon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone from Dixon Road would like to be here? Please, go ahead.
Surprise, surprise. Okay, so, boy, it's interesting to sit through a presentation like that. Do all of you have a copy of my exhibits in opposition to this application? I would ask you, please, to turn to Exhibit G. And you'll see the first photographic images in color is the Wellesley, Massachusetts tower. I strongly encourage each of you, please, go onto Google, search for cell tower burns to the ground, and watch the very large, very clear picture of this tower burning and collapsing in a heap of flames. Now, Mr. Gaudioso said cell towers are steel. They don't go up in flames. Please look at the next page because a photograph is worth 1,000 words. This is the photograph of the cell tower fire from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in June 2013. Based upon what is depicted in this photograph, with regard to Mr. Gaudioso's claim that cell towers do not go in fire, I respectfully disagree. Now, so that's one from Philadelphia, one from Massachusetts. The next page is a color photograph of a cell tower in flames in Montgomery, Maryland, 2015. You can go on the internet and find these. They're not hard to find. Pretty much, the only times I've ever gone to research this, I pretty much find that at least once a month a cell tower goes on fire. I would probably say that in 70 to 75% of the cases, they don't collapse. What usually happens is they burn really hot and they bend and they warp. And then if they're put out in time, they cool and they stand back up. But if they're not put out in time, like the Wellesley one, they collapse in a flaming heap. It's very dramatic. And if there's any nearby that's flammable, if you watch that video, and what I still can't understand is why they couldn't put it out before it collapsed. What that tells me is the fire went up so fast, the fire department couldn't get there in time, despite the fact that it was on a main road. And not an isolated road. If you watch the video, you'll see probably 100 cars drive by. And everybody's videoing this thing up in flames and collapsing. So, with regard to Mr. Gaudioso's representation that they don't go on fire, I ask you to look at just this sampling of photographs. But if this is not enough, go on the internet, go on Google, take a look, you'll find many. If that's not enough, the following exhibit is Exhibit H. I think I've given you, I don't know, 25 articles about cell tower fires, which required a school to be evacuated. These are not ones involving fatalities. Those are they're there too, I assure you. But this is just a sampling of 30 cases I pulled. I don't know, this probably took me 15 minutes. So any allegation that cell towers don't go on fire is absurd. That's number one. Similarly absurd is any claim at all that Verizon is telling Homeland where this tower has to go. That's absurd. Okay. One of the reasons I have a pretty good understanding of how site developers think and how they work is because before I fought against cell towers, I not only negotiated leases for cell towers, but I represented a site developer, just like Homeland. I represent a company doing exactly what Homeland does. And quite frankly, I was so disgusted, I couldn't do it anymore. So now I switch sides and I make less money, but I sleep better at night, okay? Verizon did not tell Homeland they have to put it at these locations. I guarantee you. So how do they make their choices? Well, I'll tell you what my clients did when I represented a company putting these up. They will look for areas where it's reasonable to anticipate future needs in capacity. And what they will do is, and when I'm saying them, a site developer, and I'm also going to correct another false statement made by Mr. Gaudioso. He said earlier, I claimed Homeland was the only applicant. I never said that. What I said was, Homeland is a site developer. They don't provide any personal wireless services. So the record is clear. Homeland is claiming, it does not claiming that it needs this tower. It's claiming Verizon needs the tower, which once again is contradicted by Verizon's own data.
Mr. Campbell, let me interrupt you. The Dixon Road people have the floor now. You can speak after they also. No. Look. And you can come. No. Look. Let me be very clear. You'll have a time to speak. Right now, the Dixon Road people have the floor. Sorry to interrupt you.
So I've negotiated leases for Verizon, for Sprint, for AT&T, for all of them. I've negotiated leases to put cell towers up. I've negotiated leases for municipalities to have cell towers. And essentially, if a site developer finds a location where they're going to build a cell tower, and they approach Verizon and say, look, I got this site, I'm going to have 4 carriers, do you want the top spot? Verizon's always going to say yes. First of all, money is no object to Verizon, okay? We used to think of the tobacco companies as the mega giants of money. They're paupers compared to the wireless companies, okay? The critical aspect of a cell tower is location, okay? Now, they're talking about putting 4 carriers on a 110-foot tower. It's not going to happen. Every carrier on a cell tower needs 10 feet of vertical real estate. What that means is, even if you've got a 4-foot antenna, you could have a 4-foot, 6-foot, or 8-foot, okay? If Verizon has an 8-foot antenna and puts it up at the 110 feet, the next carrier, for its antennas to work, have to be 10 feet lower for the cells to operate. So if you're going to put 4 carriers on a 150-foot tower, let's say the Verizon's tower antennas go halfway down. It's an 8-foot antenna. So the first antenna, the base of it, goes from 110 to 106. Now you need to go 10 feet before you hit the start of the next antenna. That means the 4th carrier would be at like, what, 63 feet? Do you really think anybody's going to pay for that? They're not. This tower is going to be taller than what they're representing to you, okay? Go on the internet and look up what is the vertical real estate necessary for multiple cells on a cell tower. You don't have to be an RF engineer to figure this out. Now, as far as the definition of a gap, you asked excellent questions. Oh, let me back up. They said they gave you the data. I'm sorry, maybe I missed it. I looked through everything I could find on the town's records, and what I could not find, and if I'm mistaken, I'd love to see it, they did not give you the hard data from the test. There is no listing of the signal strengths they took anywhere in the file, so either they're not telling the truth or I couldn't find it. What they gave you is the result of their modeling. They took the actual signal strengths and manipulated them for whatever reason. Maybe they're accurate, maybe they're not, but what I'm telling you is unless you see the actual records of the signal strengths, which they have, they can just print them out, but they didn't. They're not on the file. And of equal import, nor are the drop call records from Verizon. When they say there's nothing else they can give you, seriously? Verizon can't actually tell you how many calls were dropped in every given location? Of course they can. And if you really want to take a look at the veracity or the authenticity of their reports, the sine wave charts are laughable. The sine wave charts that look like this, take a look at them. You're going to find something really funny. When they talk about the high level of drop calls, all of the sine waves are pointed at the top and the bottom. But when they go to the sine wave that shows a lot of drops, all of a sudden the one at the top is cut off. It's the only sine wave chart with vertical space, which shows the top of the chart is cut off, which means if it wasn't, the drop call rate would have been in excess of 100%, which is impossible, which suggests that the sine wave was actually moved up. It was manipulated. And on top of that, when they tell you a percentage of drop calls were dropped, a percentage of what? How many calls? Was it 3 calls out of 500 million? I don't know, because they haven't given you the hard data. All I'm telling you is, if you want to make sure that the data they're giving you is accurate, ask for the hard data. Now, as far as the Dixon Road Tower, at least they've taken an inkling of a step in the right direction, because the site that was proposed before today was absurd. You don't put a 110-foot tower 50 feet from somebody's property line on a 10-acre parcel of property. That shows they really don't care what they submit to you, okay? Because there's no way they can claim that, consistent with your code requirements, that they minimize the adverse aesthetic impact to the greatest extent possible. That's a joke. Can any of them stand in front of you with a straight face and say that application represented an attempt to do that? It's nonsense, okay? So now I'm going to try to be nicer. Here's what I'm going to suggest. In every case, I look at the sites. I've looked at this site. There are far less intrusive alternative locations. And I'm going to be really bold and suggest to the board, and I'm going to say this. Cell towers are, in fact, a necessary evil. Okay? Everybody loves their cell phones. We need them. Your code has smart planning provisions, which are consistent with smart planning provisions across the country. Smart planning provisions are called such because they recognize you need cell towers. So what are your goals of your code? Your goals are really threefold. Number one, you want to regulate cell towers so you can saturate the town with coverage, while at the same time minimizing the number of towers you need to provide that coverage. And number three, minimizing the unnecessary adverse aesthetic impact on homes and communities. That's what you should guide you. That's why getting the information is critical, because before you can figure out how to do that, they need to show you exactly where the gaps are. Because if they don't, you have no idea if this is least intrusive means. Now, when I looked at this site, and I looked at the other one too, and I've recommended some alternative sites. To me, I found one site that I thought would be superior, but there are others. I looked at the Jimmy McDonough Memorial Park, and my thoughts were, I wouldn't put in a park, I wouldn't want this near kids, but directly to the east of the park is the undeveloped property. And yes, there are woods there, but there's no homes. This tower could easily be placed in the property directly to the east of Memorial Park. So I would suggest to the town, if Homeland really wants to get towers here, I'm going to hope that the town and Homeland can speak. You've heard from your constituents. They don't want it near homes. Perhaps less intrusive alternative locations could be arrived at. Maybe something could be worked out. But certainly in this case, I think the undeveloped property to the east of Jimmy McDonough Memorial Park is far superior. The only downside for Homeland is, and the only reason they won't want to do it there, it costs more money. Because you see, if they put it on this site here, they have easy access, they have connectability, both in terms of power and connectivity for the line. If they have to put it out into an undeveloped area, they have to remove foliage, they have to put in a gravel access road, they may have to run utility poles to put the power and the connectivity in. So that site will be more expensive, so they might want to say, oh, gee, we can't put it there. But the reality is, there's no legitimate reason why it can't go there. And as long as there is a sufficiently wide access path, okay, you got a risk of fire, but as long as you've got plenty of room for a fire apparatus to get in there, it's a far superior site. So I hope that maybe somebody sitting behind me might think about that and might discuss it with the town. In similar vein, same thing for the other site. There are significant alternatives that are viable. The only other thing I would suggest to the board is to consider hiring a slightly different type of RF engineer, and that is very simple, a site RF engineer. You hear from them and PureCon that it's got to go here, okay? We know it's nonsense, because if you look at the site they wanted to use for Dixon Road until tonight, there was no way that PureCon could justify. PureCon couldn't stand in front of you and say, it has to go here 50 feet from somebody's home. So if it collapses, it's going to fall on somebody. So that, it just removes all the credibility from their report. My suggestion is, there are plenty of RF engineers who are alternative site analysis people, and they can tell you, even from their allegations, sites that would be equally suitable to remedy whatever gap in coverage they claim to exist. And there are a lot in your area that don't have to be near people's homes. So if you're going to hire a site engineer, and again, I have strong reservations about anybody hiring Mr. Graff without him disclosing his conflict. That's horrible, in my opinion. But I think there's probably a happy solution here. I think, I've looked at all the alternatives. I go on Google Earth, I study all the areas around, I look at the streets, I look at the homes. There are plenty of alternatives for both locations. And I respectfully submit that those should be considered, because you heard the so basically you can achieve both objectives. You can accommodate Homeland and yet still make sure that these people's homes are not adversely affected. So I respectfully submit that to the board. There was something else important I had to tell you, and I can't remember it. That's really bad. Just give me a moment. Significant gap definition. Interesting thing, I've been battling this all over the United States. When the Telecommunications Act of 1996 was adopted, the code does not define what a significant gap is. And courts have been loath to describe it. However, a federal court in New York has described it. And what they said is, a gap in service exists when someone using a carrier's personal wireless services is unable to initiate, maintain, and conclude a call without interruption or loss of service. A significant gap is a gap which is in fact significant, either in geographic location or the number of persons who are deprived of service. If they have one block where you can't get service, that's not a significant gap. If you have 50 people that can't get service, it's not a significant gap. The important part is who makes that decision? The reality is it's you. It's you. It's your job to make that decision. As long as you make a decision based upon the evidence before you, courts are loath to overturn that decision. So that's one of the factual determinations I'll ask you to make. Ironically, Mr. Gaudioso referred to the Kent case, which blows my mind, because he talked about lane appraisal being accepted. The lane appraisal was not accepted by any zoning board in the Kent case, and the reason is the Kent application was so bad they knew they couldn't get it approved by the zoning board. So much to the chagrin of the zoning board, Mr. Gaudioso's client basically went and asked for a zoning approval from the town board. And no member of the town board was on the zoning board. And the town board made a decision that there was a significant gap in service because the supervisor wanted the site. They put it on a town-owned highway property site, so it never really got a real site review. The Board of Zoning Appeals wasn't happy about it, but they never got a chance to review the application. And they said it's basically exempt from zoning laws. That's what happened in that case. Nobody said the lane appraisal was worth the paper it was written on, because I assure you it wasn't. So in any event, it is a step in the right direction, moving away from those homes. It changes what's in my brief. It certainly doesn't change the color photographs of the fire. You can judge for yourself whether his representation that they don't go fire is accurate, and I thank you very much for your time.
Robert Montanaro, 30 Brittany Lane. I certainly respect everyone's time, so I'll be extremely brief. I have a lot of respect for the working people here that have to get up, including the board, and I thank you in advance for the time that you've given us. I'll make a few points here, which is that I think you've seen enough data to know what cell phone towers do to the hard-earned equity that everybody in this room who's going back to work to put more equity in their home, and that's probably their major retirement money. And I think you've seen from what realtors who are in the real estate business say about cell towers. So I wouldn't debate law with Mr. Gaudioso, but I will take a realtor's opinion over anyone else's. And I think you see that it will greatly take a lot of equity out of these homeowners. I can tell you I've got AT&T and Verizon. I don't have any issues at my home. The other point that I'll make is that I again say that I do think smart planning by the zoning board, by the planning board, and ultimately by the town board, it encompasses looking at town properties and commercial properties where the town gets the income from the tower that you help defray the costs that are going on in this town. In addition to that, you then are the landlord of Homeland. And with everything I've seen with some of the disingenuous information and the manipulation, I think I have a lot more faith in the town being the landlord rather than a private individual who is selling out their neighbors. Thank you.
Anybody else like to be heard?
I do. My name is Renee Pereira. I live at 42 Brittany Lane. The town has gotten a bunch of our letters, and including with what Mr. Campanelli had submitted. Kimmy brought up a great thing, saying about the hazards that it might cause. So now we're going to move a tower that's closer to town, or might possibly go on town property. You all know McDonough Park, ball fields, soccer fields, skateboarding park and everything else. There's thousands of kids that go there. If there is a fire, do you died? Do you guys realize that? So I'm asking the town to please, please reconsider. Thank you.
Hello, Larry Gray, 20 Brittany Lane. I will make this brief as well, as I have a 6:15 flight tomorrow morning, and this has been going on a long time. I do want to, it was interesting that it was brought up about coming up and addressing factual inaccuracies, and I'd like to do that myself, particular to the lane appraisal, which may be a part of this process. This is my first time going through it, so I don't know much about it, but specific to the lane appraisal, and I was the one that came to the town to get a copy of it. I've read it. I have 30 years of experience in research and analytics. Maybe what the lane appraisal does is what it's supposed to do, but the way they're portraying it as a study that talks about an increase in property values is factually incorrect. Basically, as it was pointed out before, they look at homes that sold near a cell tower, ones that are in view of it, ones that are not. Then they take the sale price, square footage, dollars per foot. They compare in view of the tower versus not in view of the tower. That's great. I don't care about that. What I care about is if my property today is worth X and they put a cell tower in, what's it worth after it? I want to know the before and the after. I don't care about comparing seeing a tower or not seeing a tower. So to say that values increase is incorrect. They're not looking at any before information. It is all after the tower was built. And I think that is just representing the study in a very ingenuous way. Now, just 2 quick points, because a lot has already been said. Here's why I believe studies you read online, why I would believe real estate brokers and so forth, that, and I've done a lot of research myself, anywhere between 20 and 30% property value declines. Easily. Every one I did. I didn't see one study online that said, oh, they go up. Here's 2 facts that I would say as to why those property values go down. This was from key findings from a survey conducted by the National Institute for Science, Law, and Public Policy in 2014. Surveyed 1,000 people. 2 facts you just need to know. 94% said a nearby cell tower would negatively impact interest in the property and the price they'd be willing to pay. And then this one really stuck out to me. 88% said that under no circumstance would they ever purchase a property in the vicinity of a cell tower. So if taking 88% of people who might be interested in your house out of the way, how does your property value go up? That's the question I would ask. That's really it. Just again, it's been said a couple of times, but it is my belief that the town is in place to protect the rights of the community, and we as the residents really implore you to reject this and look for other locations, which we certainly agree with, and putting this in the middle of a residential neighborhood full of children and families, just not the right thing to do.
Good evening. My name is Bobby Haley, and I live at 26 Brittany Lane. My property is adjacent to 36 Dixon Road, and my backyard borders the site where the tower is planned. A cell tower does not belong in any residential neighborhood for many reasons. One of my most important reasons is the well-being of my family, especially my children, who are 7, 5, and 1. I don't think anybody in this room, nor in their right mind, would want their children growing up next to a tower that emits a mass amount of radio frequency. The World Health Organization has listed this RF radiation as a possible carcinogen, meaning possible cancer cause. My wife and I grew up in this town. We own businesses in this town. We want our children to experience what we believe to be a close-knit community where people care about one another and their neighbors. A couple neighbors don't understand this. Taxes aren't cheap by any means, and we went over our budget last year to buy this home. The construction of this tower will turn our dream into a nightmare. As one of the properties bordering the proposed site, we will see the largest declines in property value. I've spoken with numerous realtors, people have touched on this, and they all agree it would be detrimental to the value of all the homes in our neighborhood. We would expect the board to reject this tower on any residential property. I see they resubmitted to move the property. It's literally 2 football fields. You're still going to see it in the sky. You're going to see it from the park. I was going to ask do they have to resubmit an application for this new proposed site? Will there be balloon tests for us to view from our homes?
We just got this a few minutes ago. We didn't even have a chance to discuss it yet.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll follow up on that.
Okay. And he mentioned, the lawyer here mentioned something about good access from the ball fields in case of fires. It's wide open. There's no access drives to that part of the property on the ball fields. So I'd like the board to consider that as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hello. My name's John O'Leary, and I'm actually going to talk about, I live on Dixon Lake Drive, which is parallel to Dixon Road. I've lived here for 13 years. I'm going to speak about the coverage, which I know, which I'm actually a radio frequency engineer for the past 23 years. I started my career with Nextel, Sprint, and now we serve many other carriers. Since I moved in here, I've had Nextel, I've had Sprint, I've had Verizon, now I have T-Mobile. The coverage, there is no coverage there. When you come around the bend, I know if I'm on my phone, in my car, with my hands-free, the call is going to drop. I get off the call before I even come around the corner. If you continue around Long Pond and go towards, around the lake, towards, going towards Bullet Hole, the back way I call it, same thing. You cannot make a call with any carrier, and I've had them all. Today I have T-Mobile and Sprint. I even tried to do things to enhance the coverage in my house at my cost to improve the coverage, and there's just not enough signal to even do that. Someone talked earlier about Verizon. Verizon Fios is not Verizon Wireless. I have Verizon Fios. Yeah, I got internet. I got home telephone. I don't have home cellular service. The service now, the world is changing, right? It's a wireless world. We can't stop it. But we're behind right now. We're not going to have this, if there's no more infrastructure, we're not going to have better service. We don't even get 3G here, let alone 4G, 5G, 6G, whatever is coming. I look at the wireless as a service, like telephone, like cable, like water, gas, sewer. It's a service. You can't build it without infrastructure. And the only way to get into the residential area, because they've targeted all the commercial industrial area, which is along 6, or maybe going back on 301. By the way, you can't make a call going back down to 301 from Dixon Road either, because I go there all the time. The only way to do it, to cover residential services, is to get into it. They've been building these networks for 25, 30 years. Had they been able to get the service there without being in the residential, they would have done it. It's not in their interest to build a tower to go through a fight if they don't need it. So I maybe my neighbors won't like this, but I'm in favor of the application because the coverage is bad. And it is a safety concern. It is a safety concern. When you lose power, I lose power all the time with these storms. Your phone is going to go out. If you had a tower there, you could still use your service and still contact or call the police or fire, what have you. So I tend to want to approve the tower. And as far as the visual, I know I'm down low in the valley. I can't see the tops of the lights at McDonough Park, so I can't see from anywhere in the valley with the tree coverage that you're going to be able to even see the tower. So I drive around there all the time. When you're driving around or sitting around, you can't see through the tree cover to see that far up and that high up. So maybe Brittany Lane, they have a better view, they're up on a hill. They're getting service from somewhere else because of their height and elevation. And as far as some of the other things, the property values I can't talk about, but we have towers around the whole town. There's towers on Lake Mayapack that's been there for probably 75 years. Their property values have not diminished. You have 3 towers right around this building. So they're required for public safety, for the community safety. And I think that we should approve or figure out some way to get service back there, because I have to deal without the service. I can't work from home or do anything like that because the service is no good at my house. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else from the public like to be heard tonight?
Joe Henry, 74 Brittany Lane. Just take a quick look at this. Newly proposed cell tower area will directly impact my home. I am at the very end of the cul-de-sac. I've been there for close to 20 years. In fact, I purchased the property from a member of this planning board with the wonderful expectation that I was going to raise a family and have a wonderful home and have the serenity when I come home from a hard day's work. Now, what they're telling me is I'm going to see a 150-plus foot cell tower in my backyard. How would you guys feel? Horrible. Not only that, as aside from this gentleman here, I've actually constructed cell towers. In fact, I constructed one of the largest on the East Coast, the 9/11 project in Orange County. I know the dangers, and there are some. I need to take that into consideration, because if that goes off, it's going to be a problem. Okay? Planning board, please serve the community. Reject this proposal. Please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Guardioso?
Thank you, Chairman. We have nothing else to add other than we'll put in a submission as we discussed before.
So, similar to the Croton Falls, my preference would be to leave the public hearing open, ask Homeland Towers to extend the shot clock, and that will give us time to review everything we've heard tonight, and for yourselves to do the same thing.
I just have one question. Mr. Gordios, will you, oh, I'm sorry. In your response, would you also address the New York City environmental protection letter dated September 10th with the issues that are raised in that?
That's on Croton Falls.
Yeah, for Croton
Yeah.
Falls, I'm sorry.
Correct, yes.
I know we're talking different, we're talking.
Yeah, I think the issue they raised had to do with a private right-of-way, not
Yeah,
with
the right-of-way
respect to
issue,
the
yeah.
planning board.
Yeah, thank you.
I think he needs to acknowledge.
Yeah, I'm not done. I'm not done. Thank you. Any other comments? Would you reply to Pat and the board about everything we just documented, about extending the shot clock? And
Sure, so what my understanding is the matter will be held over to September 25th, or at the latest October 9th, and based on that, we're willing to extend the shot clock to the end of October.
The zoning board meeting's not till the 26th, I believe, so.
Yeah, so
It's almost-
the zoning board cannot act until the planning board conducts
Right.
its secret analysis.
Anything else?
Great, thank you for your time this evening.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Okay. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everybody.